This page, right then, it's the cover of an old N64 magazine from back in the day. Must be 1999 going by the date there. Blimey, look at all those games shouting at you. Zelda new game revealed, it says. That would have got everyone buzzing back then, wouldn't it? Wonder what Zelda game that was teasing. Probably Ocarina of Time was still fairly fresh at this point, so maybe Majora's Mask was on the horizon. As back there. And South Park games, remember when that was all the rage? 2 new games, it boasts here. Then there's Armorines, apparently the world's first playtest. Not sure if anyone really cared about Armorines, but hey ho! Mario Golf 64 inches is there too. Terrific, they're calling it. Corny. But it probably was quite good, to be fair. Premier Manager is plastered across the page as well, with some bloke holding a football. Must have been a big deal for footy fans, and they were giving away England tickets, which is a decent prize. And Perfect Dark gets a shout too. 30 shots you've never seen before. Bit dramatic, aren't they? That was rare at their peak though, so it was probably something special. Down the side it mentions other stuff, like Jet Force Gemini, Kirby 64, Donkey Kong 64, Shadow Man, all games they were covering inside. And a Planet Game Boy section, with a free Game Boy mag inside too apparently, for your handheld fix. Oh, and a free double game guide, with Duke Nukem 0 Hour and Star Wars Rogue Squadron. Lift it up, and have a butcher's. Yeah, a lot going on this month. Typical magazine cover really, trying to cram everything in. This page is a welcome message from the editor of N64 Magazine, issue 31, August 1999. It's talking about how this issue is packed tighter than an Arsenal back four, which is a bit of a football joke, considering how Arsenal used to play back then. He mentions that Quake 2 was a bit disappointing in terms of review timing, but Premier Manager 64 turned up for review, and they got early copies and tickets to England vs Luxembourg, and rare invited N64 readers lucky sods. They've got previews of Jet Force Gemini and Perfect Dark, and unlimited access to Armorines. There's also a Mario Golf review, more screens from South Park games, and a Star Wars Episode 1 racer guide. He also mentions a Wish You Were Here's feature from a reader. Down the side it highlights a few games in circles. South Park is in there, saying Rally and Chef's Louvre Shack was smashed apart for review. Armorines is also featured as fab bug splattering action. Premier Manager 64 is mentioned as don't buy until you've read the review. Perfect Dark has 30 exclusive screenshots from what they call 1999's most anticipated game. And there's a free double game guide with Rogue Squadron solved, and to keep it for Duke Nukem at the end of the month. Plus a Game Boy section being the world's first and best Game Boy magazine. There's a list of staff like Tim Weaver as editor, Will Overton the art editor, and a whole bunch of other names in production and advertising. At the bottom, it says next issue is out, Friday the 6th of August, and to jump to page 136 to find out why it's going to be fantastic. And right at the very bottom it's August 1999, issue number 3. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 31, August 99, is the contents page. First up is Planet 64, with news about a Zelda sequel, the 64DD, and something about the Game Boy going online. Still not sure what the 64DD was supposed to be about really. Anni. Then it's Coming Soon section, showing Donkey Kong 64, which was a big deal at the time, DK back on Nintendo. South Park Rally, with the usual suspects in carts, Stan, Kyle, Cartman and Kenny. And Revolt, a radio-controlled car racing game from Acclaim. N64 Arena, on page 68, UK releases and reviews. Premier Manager 64, Football Management. Shadowgate 64, a first-person RPG. And Superman 64, which they're calling a big flying turkey, haha, not holding back are they? Import Arena, page 80, for Japanese and American games. Mario Golf 64, A Bug's Life, based on the movie. Fighting Force 64, and they're saying it stinks, so maybe one to avoid. Finally, some regular features. Information Station, N64 Shopper, a look at issue 32 next month. Wish You Were Here, for Forgotten Games, and Planet Game Boy Mag, page 4, and issue 31 at the bottom. Looks like a decent issue overall. This page of the magazine is the contents page. Always a thrill to see what's inside this month. Up front we've got a future look section, promising a peek at upcoming N64 games. Perfect Dark is touted as a GoldenEye beater. Strong words. But everyone was hoping for something to top Rare's Bond game. Top Gear Rally 2 is also featured, questioning if it can beat V-Rally. Those were the racing game debates back then. And Quake 2, promising multiplayer gore, just what you wanted after school. How To, this month, is about Star Wars Episode 1, Racer, burning it up Sebula style, featuring Jar Jar Binks, who we all loved. Cough. Then there's a special investigation into Armorines, comparing it to Starship Troopers, and even Turok 2, they're really selling the bug-blasting angle. Elsewhere, there's the usual Club 64 mailbox, action replay for your cheat codes, floating over walls in Matzakart, classic. Tips extra for more game help, and the slightly scary Dr. Kit's Game Clinic. The Nintendo hotline for when you're really stuck, and Game On for unusual game challenges, whatever they were. I'm the Best, and Skill Club 64 Feet for competitive types, and sections for Contact Directory, a general directory, and back issues and subscriptions in case you missed an issue. We've also got a feature on Jet Force Gemini, another rare game. They were really dominating the N64 back then, weren't they? Multiplayer compo. The results sounds like a gaming event, and Losing the Plot promises a look at silly game storylines, probably good for a laugh. All in all, a decent looking issue for August 99. This page is from an old N64 mag, probably around 99, judging by the games they're hyping. It's all about upcoming games, specifically pushing Perfect Dark, Top Gear Rally 2, and Quake 2. Perfect Dark is clearly the star of the show, with a big future look headline and loads of screenshots. They're calling it your first look at the big new N64 games. Perfect Dark's getting a massive 6 pages in this issue apparently, with over 30 never-before-seen shots. Looking at the screenshots, the lab environments look a bit more detailed than GoldenEye, which is a good thing. There's talk of cutscenes, with Joe Dark and some alluring action spandex. Cheeky. They also mention a very Blade Runner-esque scene, and a weird little alien on a hospital trolley, suggesting you should best shoot it, eh? They're even talking about the pistol having a chunky recoil feel, and two-handed pistols being fun, though even if not accurate. It's all sounding pretty intense for an N64 game back then. Accurate. They've got an info burst box for Perfect Dark with all the nerdy details. It's coming from Rare, naturally, and it's on a 256 megabit cartridge. It's 14 players, needs a memory pack, and supports the Rumble Pack and GB Pack, so basically all the bells and whistles we were used to with N64 games. Expansion Pack is a no-go though. Interesting. It was supposed to be out in December, though TBA is next to the UK date, typical, probably delayed as usual. Anticipation rating is 5 red blobs out of 5, so they're clearly excited. Top Gear Rally 2 gets a 10, whatever that means, probably pages. They're asking, could it be the racer we've been waiting for? And Quake 2 gets a 12 pages, and an exclusive Q&A with the developers. So those are in there too, but Perfect Dark is clearly the main attraction. Right at the bottom it says, want more new games? Check out the coming soon section of Planet 64 on page 20. So there's more to look at elsewhere in the magazine. Issue 31 it is. Good times, good times. This page is a look at Perfect Dark, which was a massive deal back then, especially as GoldenEye was such a hit. It's previewed under the Future Look section of the magazine. There's a big stylish drawing of Joanna Dark on the left, very moody and futuristic, typical 90s vibe. Tree. The article talks about how E3 is super noisy and distracting, but Perfect Dark managed to cut through all that. Apparently when you played it at the show, the game was so immersive that all you could hear was the game or even silence when stealth was needed. They mention enemy animation is still based on GoldenEye, which, yeah, was probably a bit of a worry at the time, hoping for something a bit more advanced. Key. There's a screenshot showing what looks like a corridor in the game, with some moody lighting, typical Perfect Dark aesthetic. The reviewer seems impressed, saying it's far from any ordinary sequel, and crammed to the gunwales with new ideas and features. They mention gameplay innovations like being able to jump down from ledges, and weapons that sense body heat and shoot through walls. Sounds pretty cutting edge for the N64 back then, didn't it? Warrington Nor. They also make a point about how Rare must be feeling the pressure, especially with Super Mario 64 2 possibly being on Nintendo's next console instead of the N64. They reckon Perfect Dark is Nintendo's big game for Christmas 1999, and they're calling it Nintendo's Golden Girl. A bit dramatic, but you could see why they'd say that. It was supposed to be massive. Overall, it's a pretty positive preview, building up the hype for Perfect Dark, which, looking back, rightly so, it was a cracker. This page of the magazine is all about Perfect Dark, which back then was being hyped as the next big thing after GoldenEye on the N64. They're calling it Living on the Edge, and it's part of their Future Look section, so it's all about what's coming soon. They're talking about how Perfect Dark is improving on GoldenEye, especially the movement and control system. Apparently you can fall off ledges now and drop down on enemies, which sounds a bit cheeky, and could spice up the temple and complex levels from GoldenEye, which are making a return in Perfect Dark along with loads of new areas. Imagine dropping down on some poor sod in multiplayer, proper sneaky that. Like. One of the daft things they mention is using the Game Boy camera to map your mate's face, or your mum's, onto characters in Deathmatch. Sounds a bit of a laugh to be fair. Imagine blasting your nan with a rocket launcher in the game kids today, eh? Orrington. There's a bit of worry about censorship though, because of all the fuss in America about violence in games, especially with Jet Force Gemini being a bit fruity as well. They're wondering if Rare might have to tone down Perfect Dark, which would be a bit of a downer if it got all watered down. There are screenshots dotted around showing off the game, bits of gameplay, and some of the weapons like alien dart guns. One picture even mentions sideways shooting Blake's 7 style. Bit of a deep cut there, only proper nerds will get that reference, showing Joanna Dark shooting sideways. Very cool in a retro kind of way. They even mention hover taxis like in Blade Runner, so it seems they're throwing everything at this game. They reckon Rare are the top dogs and we should all just sit back and wait. Pity that, they say at the end. A bit sarcastic there. Maybe they're thinking it's all a bit too much hype. Who knows with these magazine folks. This page in N64 Magazine, right, it's all about Perfect Dark, as you can probably guess from the massive title. Why are we waiting? They are banging on about GoldenEye again, saying it was the definitive multiplayer game on the N64, which it was, wasn't it? They're talking about how Perfect Dark was supposed to be out ages ago after GoldenEye, and they're wondering what's taking so long. There are a few screenshots dotted about. One's got Joanna Dark on some platform with a ruddy great gun. Classic. Another one shows laser targeting, which they reckon is a nice touch. And there's another weird top-down view of a street scene with a hovercar. They say the hovercars look good, and you'll hopefully get to drive one yourself. Sounds a bit like Wipeout maybe. Treat. They're going on about these bots in multiplayer, computer-controlled players. Apparently Rare are making them really clever so they don't just act predictably, which sounds ambitious for the N64. They reckon it'll strain the console a bit, especially in a 4-player match. Let's hope it doesn't chug too much. The article mentions that EA churn out new FIFA games every year, but sports games are easier because they have set rules, and games like GoldenEye need a whole new game structure. Makes sense, I suppose. They also mentioned that Rare thought they could just use the GoldenEye engine but ended up fiddling about and making a new one, which is why it's taking so long. They pride themselves on perfection, you see, those Rare chaps. Bye. They're saying that Perfect Dark will be worth the wait, and there will be more updates in the coming months. Well, let's hope so, because we've been waiting a while, haven't we? It does look pretty good though, must admit. This page in N64 Magazine features a look at Top Gear Rally 2. It's being called a mud-spattered racer that could be better v Rally, so they're setting expectations pretty high already. The review talks about the original Top Gear Rally on the N64 being a bit of a mixed bag back in '97, but enthusiasts liked it for being a proper racer with bouncy handling. Apparently some people couldn't see past the muddy graphics and not many tracks, which is a bit harsh, as it was still a decent game. Top Gear Rally 2 is, confusingly, the third game in the series, with development duties moved from Boss Game Studios to Snowblind after Overdrive. They reckon Overdrive lost its way a bit with the Nitros and San Fran Rush-style jumps, so Sapphire, the developers, are trying to bring it back to more traditional rallying. They mention BioFreaks, their N64 debut, which is a bit of a weird comparison, but okay. Norsa, there are screenshots showing off the game. One highlights the fog, saying it's part of the environment, not bad programming, which is a bit of a dig at some games back then, eh? Another points out the first-person view being the fastest. They also mention a yellow arrow to tell you about corners and wide tracks, though they joke not to expect them to be wide all the time. There's another screenshot about the brakes for left-hand corners, and one praising the realistic rally feel with cars leaving the ground over bumps, but thankfully no ridiculous San Francisco Rush stuff. The info burst section at the bottom gives you the basic details. It's from Sapphire/Chemco, a 128 megabit cart, 14 players, memory pack and rumble pack support, but no GB pack. Releases down for autumn, with anticipation rating of 4 out of 5 little red balls. Looks promising then, we'll see if it lives up to the hype. This page is having a look at Top Gear Rally 2 on the N64. It's a future look, so they're giving us a preview of what to expect. There are a few screenshots dotted about, showing the game in action. Looks like your standard rally racing affair really. They're making a big deal about the damage you can do to your car, saying even trackside crashes will mess up your motor. And it's not just cosmetic, apparently it affects handling, which sounds alright I suppose, a bit more realistic than just a shiny scratch. And they're also banging on about a random track generator, which sounds interesting if it works properly, that is. could mean loads of new tracks to hoon around on. They mention 15 licensed cars, including the Ford Focus, which was pretty new back then. They seem quite keen on it overall, saying it could be a really entertaining game if they get the damage right, and they're hoping for a release in the autumn. Seems like they reckon it's got potential, but they're not going totally overboard just yet, keeping a bit of British reserve about it all. This page is all about Quake 2 on the N64. Seems like a bit of an exclusive interview with the team behind it. They've got some screenshots scattered about, with little captions. One talks about hoping all that lead will weigh an enemy down, another is about blue lighting, and how the game isn't all muddy brown and grey. They've even got one about the BFG being messy. Yeah, no kidding. Another caption mentions exploding enemies with explosives at close range being suicidal. Good advice that. Then there's a comment about shooting guys with buckets on their heads being a day's work. Sounds like Quake alright. The Game Info Burst box says it's from Activision. It's a 128 megabit car, 1 to 4 players, memory expansion and rumble packs are all supported, but no GB pack, whatever that was even for. It's slated for August in the US and UK, and TBA for Japan. They've given it a pretty good anticipation rating, 4 out of 5 of those orange ball things. Nur. The text on the right talks about being surprised by Quake 2, turning up at the office, and tracking down the developers, Raster. Apparently they were trying to make a proper shooter, a rival to Turok and Perfect Dark, although maybe not quite GoldenEye level. Someone called Aaron Seeler from Raster says they wanted to enhance the PC version with brighter graphics, colored lighting, and simpler maps. Sounds like they're trying to make it a bit more N64 friendly, which is probably fair enough. This page in N64 Mag from back in the day is all about Quake 2 on the N64, a future look it says at the top. Right then, Quake 2. They're kicking things off comparing it to GoldenEye, saying GoldenEye has a deeper storyline, which is probably true mind you. Quake was never really about deep stories, was it? More about blasting strogs. Warrington you. They're banging on about the multiplayer, saying deathmatches are the business and how fast it all moves. There are a few screenshots dotted about. One showing a strog up close, proper nasty looking blighter, another with some multiplayer action going on, and then a few showing bits of gameplay. They mention the pistol being weedy but ammo free, and the chain gun being basic but helps speed things up. There's a line about blood drops being circular to keep within the lore, which is a bit of a laugh, isn't it? Remember all the fuss about that back then? It talks about the maps being designed for flow and rocket jumping, all that good stuff. And they quote some bloke called Aaron saying the strogs are mean and you'll need fatigues, not a tuxedo to infiltrate their defenses. Bit dramatic, isn't he? They also mention the analog control and how configurable it is, which was a big deal on the N64 controller. Sounds like they're quite impressed with it, and they're promising a proper review in the next issue. Good times. This page of Planet 64 News Desk is buzzing about the big news: a sequel to Zelda, Ocarina of Time, has actually been confirmed. Apparently everyone had noticed that Ocarina had these hooks for the 64DD, and Shigsy himself had hinted at something called Ura Zelda, so it was kind of expected, but now it's official. It's going to be called Zelda Gaiden, at least for now, and it's coming out on the 64DD, and initially only in Japan, which is a bit of a pain. They reckon you'll need your original Ocarina of Time cartridge to play it, which is a bit of a faff, but sounds like it'll have new worlds, characters and quests, bits that Shigsy apparently had to chop out of Ocarina in the first place. They're guessing it's going to be set in Zora's domain. The magazine reckons it's scheduled for Christmas in Japan, and they're hopeful for an American and European release in 2000, although they are being cautiously optimistic, mentioning Ocarina of Time sold loads in the run-up to Christmas. They don't think it'll clash with the big hitters like Perfect Dark, Donkey Kong and Turok, which are also on the horizon. Apparently they're going to Nintendo Space World at the end of August, and will bring back more info then. There's a picture of Link in a fighting pose, and the N64 console and the 64DD drive to remind us what we're talking about. This page has a bit of a mixed bag of news then, right? So under shortcuts, they're chatting about the Superman game for the 64, reckon it's utter rubbish, but it's selling loads anyway. Go figure, eh? The public and the critics, always different. Norsa Hasme. Then there's talk about the 64DD finally getting online. They're calling it the Internet. Very catchy. Apparently you'll be able to download games, which is a novelty back then, and play online, at least if you're in Japan for now. They mention a 28.8K modem, that's dial-up speeds for you, and some Project Dolphin hints, which we now know was the GameCube sneaky. Game Boy Gets Connected is about hooking your Game Boy up to the internet using a mobile phone. Sounds a bit clunky, but the idea of swapping data and downloading stuff on your Game Boy was pretty cool at the time. They're even worried about the battery life, which is fair enough. The games section mentions a few 64D titles like Zelda Gaiden, which we now know as Majora's Mask, Mario Artist, Shogi Chess, a Wall Street game bit random, and something called Dai Senryaku. They also talk about an F-Zero expansion disc, where you can make your own tracks, and imagine playing F-Zero online with loads of people. That would have been something. Giant Steps is about this odd game, Kyojin no Doshin, or Doshin the Giant. Sounds very bizarre philosophical life simulation where you're this giant bloke on a tropical island. You grow bigger and mess about with the islanders, causing destruction or helping them out. Proper weird, that one. Mario's Road is a funny little story about a street named after Mario in Sweden. Apparently because the Bergasala company, who are Nintendo's Scandinavian distributors, wanted to show their appreciation. Bit random, but nice for Mario, I suppose. Lastly, in the N64 diary, Tim's having a birthday, James is getting married, and there's some offer for an E3 video. They're doing a quiz, and there's a game called Bo's Your Father, no idea what that is. Star Wars Episode 1 is out, and the reviewer reckons it's good but not great. Controversial indeed. And though, surprise surprise, Duke Nukem 0 Hour is delayed again. That was always happening, wasn't it? Standard Duke. This page from N64 Magazine, right, it's got a few bits going on. Up top there's a piece about Hotel California 64. Seems like they're talking about hotels in America having SNES games, and LodgeNet are planning to put N64s in hotels too, with games like Zelda, 1080 Snowboarding and Mario Kart. Bit of alright idea if you're stuck in a hotel room, I suppose. Mess, eh? Then there's a little bit about shortcuts on page 18. Must be some tips and tricks or something. The main thing on this side is the N64 quiz. 50 quid prize, which wasn't bad back then, mind you. 10 questions to answer, all about N64 games, and the magazine itself. Questions like, which game was called Nothing Less Than Utter Contempt? Which sequel's got 15 vehicles? Where's the retractor? Who's N64 Magazine's king freak? Bit of a weird question, that one. Then there's Groundhog Day scenarios, Luigi loses, page number question, Evil Acorn, Deathmatch Bots, RRJINNRE, no idea what that is, and Superman Buy It. Sounds like typical magazine quiz stuff, a bit of fun. Down at the bottom, it's pushing this new TV show called Gamers. Apparently it's on ITV and Rapture TV, which is Film 4 on satellite, hosted by Tim and Jess, the magazine reviewers. They're saying you can see them on Saturday mornings on ITV, in Meridian, HTV, Anglia West Country and Channel regions, and then on Rapture TV, at different times Saturday and Sunday. They're saying look out for the Gamers logo throughout the magazine to see when games are being previewed on the show. Clever way to plug both the mag and the telly program, I suppose. Aimers locus. And yeah, bottom right there's the entry form for the quiz, and they've announced last month's winner was Bernard Hill from Felix Bolisto. Good luck to him, 50 quid isn't to be sniffed at. This page in N64 Magazine back in '99, we're looking at some new goods, mostly bits and bobs from Japan Center Bookshop. First off, there's this RS racing wheel, proper chunky thing, looks like it's been ripped straight out of a TVR dashboard, bit pricey at £140 mind you. Apparently it weighs a ton, but it's meant to be really responsive and works with PCs, N64 and PlayStation if you get the right cartridges. Force feedback too, which was pretty swanky back then. Rotor. Then there's a Pokeball thing for just 2 quid. Rubber shell, tiny metal Pokemon inside. Sounds like a blind bag sort of thing, you're hoping for a special gold one, but the reviewer here ended up with a silver Psyduck. Always the way in it? Russia. Next up is a talking Pikachu, nearly a tenner. Apparently it's a bit of a special offer. It's this slightly chubby Pikachu that talks, glows in the cheeks and squeaks Pikachu. Apparently, it also pleads with you to buy it, calling us kind N64 folks. Bit much really. They reckon it's failed to repeat its former verbosity since then, whatever that means, probably just got quieter. For 4 quid you could get some Doraemon stationery, writing paper, envelopes, stickers, all with Doraemon on it, the robotic cat from the 22nd century. They say it adds something to letters and job applications, not sure about that, but hey ho, warranty. Then there's an Airfix Pikachu, for about 3 quid. It's a self-assembly plastic kit, like the model aeroplanes but Pikachu shaped. Comes with little plastic trees and a plastic tongue. They seem a bit puzzled by it, but reckon it works somehow. Lastly, a Hello Kitty keyring pendant, 2 quid again. Hello Kitty, all-purpose cutie, mega popular in Japan and everywhere else. This one's enamel, got wings and a flower, and apparently looks great on an N64 keyring. Can't argue with that, Hello Kitty was everywhere back then. And there's a chance to win one of those RS racing wheels if you can answer who finished 8th in the 1987 Formula 1 World Championship. Postcard to T. Hairy Boots at N64 Magazine, Bath. First out of the hat wins. Good luck with that. This page in N64 Magazine, well, it's a bit of a mixed bag really. There's a piece on a new magazine called Nintendo World. Apparently it's aimed at younger kids and is supposed to be quite cheap. Good for them, I suppose, if you're into that sort of thing. Then there's a section called Fanzine Farm, and it's reviewing a Zelda fanzine called Zelda Angels 4 by a bloke called John Davies. Sounds like he's really into his Zelda, calling it the best game ever and all that. Apparently this fanzine is a prequel to Zelda 64 and features some interesting enemies like Angels 4, a dragon called Nectara and Stalvagia, some zombie dragon thing. If you're a massive Zelda nut, maybe worth £3.50. The main bit though is Retro World, looking back at the SNES days. They're banging on about Super Mario Kart from '92, which, yeah, was a classic back then. They say it caused a lot of arguments about whether it was better than Mario Kart 64. Bit daft really. Both were good in their own way. They reckon reviewers were a bit sniffy about it at first, but everyone loved it eventually. Then they go on about F-Zero from '91. Yeah, F-Zero was something else back then, proper fast, and looked amazing for the time, even if it was pretending to be 3D. They say it was the fastest, smoothest, sexiest game ever. Bit strong that, but it was good. Talk about how tight the controls were, and the jumps and all that. They're even comparing it to F-Zero X on the N64, saying it's still decent even now, just needs a bit of getting used to again. Whee! Lastly, in Double Take, they're briefly mentioning some upcoming games. Silicon Valley, which became Space Station Silicon Valley I think, and Grand Theft Auto, even a portable version of Silicon Valley. They mentioned the N64 GTA is still supposed to be coming out later in the year. Seemed like it was always later in the year with that game. Let's hope so, they say. Optimistic bunch, weren't they? This page is about Donkey Kong 64. Looks like they've got some new screenshots of Rare's new ape adventure. They're calling it a stunning 3D ape attack. Bit much if you ask me, but it's Donkey Kong, so we're all going to be interested, aren't we? Nah. There's a Q&A section where they're talking about camera worries. Sounds familiar from back in the Banjo days, but they reckon it won't affect the game too much, apparently. And it seems this one needs an expansion pack. First game to need one, apparently. Bit of a pain having to shell out extra dosh for that, but they are saying Nintendo might bundle it with the game, which would be decent. They're also saying it's going to be massively different from the old SNES Donkey Kong games, because it's proper 3D now and all that. Sounds ambitious. But boy. Down the side there's an info burst with the basics. Rare are doing it, naturally. 256 megabits cart, that's a big old cartridge. 1 to 4 players, memory pack and rumble pack are a no-brainer. Expansion pack is a yes, as we've just read, and GB pack is a no, whatever that is. It's out in November the 22nd. And the anticipation rating is looking pretty high according to their little tomato things. Across the top, there's a quick jump to bit flagging up other games, like 40 Winks, Kirby 64, Excitebike 64, and South Park Rally. So, a bit of a mixed bag of stuff coming up on the 64, should keep us busy, until Christmas at least. This page is about a couple of games actually, one South Park game, and a football management sim. First up, we've got South Park Chef's Love Shack. Seems like they're trying to cash in on the Mario Party craze with this one. Apparently, it's a party game with minigames, and predictably, they're going for the same humor as the cartoon, so expect swearing and fart jokes. Apparently that's the size of it. They mention minigames, with daft names like Spank the Monkey and Asses in Space. Sounds like typical South Park stuff. Chef is even in it as a trivia host. The reviewer mentions a pie-eating contest and a two-golf war, so it's got a few minigames going on at least. They reckon it'll get a 15 rating, which is probably right if it's anything like the show. Then there's this big advert for Premier Manager 64, right in your face it is, claiming to be the only football management sim on the N64. Bit of a bold statement there. Kevin Keegan is on the box, which was a big deal back then I suppose, always seemed to be endorsing something. Total Football Management they're calling it, sounds very serious for a computer game. They've even got a website address, pretty fancy for back then, shows you how things were changing. Not sure how good these football management games were on consoles, always seemed more of a PC thing to me, but there you go. This page in N64 Magazine is doing a preview piece on 40 Winks, which they're billing as GT Interactive's attempt to take on Banjo-Kazooie. Right then. It's framed as a Q&A, which is a bit of a standard magazine trick. First question is about levels. Apparently there are 6 themed worlds, each with big levels and a boss at the end, plus some bonus races. Sounds pretty standard fare for the time. Then they're asking about bosses. And it's all about Threadbare, this animated teddy who's gone bad and is called Nightcap. He's riding dinosaurs and flying UFOs. Seems like they're throwing everything at the wall here. Apparently you kick his hairy ass. Charming. 2-player mode is mentioned, co-op split screen, one player is rough and the other is tumble, each with different skills. Again, nothing groundbreaking, but co-op was always a laugh back then. There's a question about whether we've seen anything like it before, and the answer is no, not really, in a sarcastic tone. They basically say it's ripping off Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie, trying to outdo Nintendo and Rare at their own game. Bit harsh maybe, but that was magazine reviews for you back then. They mention power-ups and collectibles, you know, the usual platformer guff. Then there's an info burst box with all the specs. It's from GT. Cart size is 128 megabit, 1 or 2 players, needs a memory pack, expansion pack, rumble pack, but not a GB pack. Release date is down as October, and the anticipation rating is 3 out of 5 red blobs, so not exactly setting the world on fire. There are screenshots dotted around. One shows a colourful projectile, another mentions small enemies, and another is about lighting effects and a pirate boss. There's Ruff dressed as a jester, and another shot of collecting tokens to open doors. Standard platforming stuff really. They also mention collecting Zay icons to keep the kids asleep, and power-ups like fairies, cavemen, robots, and ninjas with kung fu sound effects. Sounds a bit bonkers. Enemies are called hoodwinks, and they're apparently protected by minions. Butt slam and projectile attacks are essential. That's the kind of cutting-edge game design we were promised. Finally, there's a will Donkey Kong be worried? Question. The answer is a blunt no. They reckon only platform game fans will care at Christmas, and they'll tell us if it's a viable alternative later. Ouch. Underneath a lava screenshot, there's a line suspended over the lava, like that bit in a certain Rare game. What was it called? Bit cheeky. And a pirate-themed image with "Shiver me timbers, Jim lad, there be the Jolly Roger." Trying a bit too hard with the pirate theme, lads. Overall, it's painting a picture of a very average platformer trying to cash in on the Banjo-Kazooie hype. Not exactly brimming with enthusiasm, are they? Still, October release. Maybe it was alright, for a bit. Probably got lost in the Christmas rush anyway. This page is about South Park Rally on the N64. Seems like they're giving it a bit of a preview. It's being pitched as a Mario Kart style game, but with a South Park flavor, naturally. They mention you can expect the usual characters and vehicles, like Grandpa in his rocket-powered wheelchair, and Jesus in his puffy white cloud cart, which sounds novel. They reckon it's trying to be a bit more grown-up than Mario Kart, which in South Park terms probably means a lot of swearing and dodgy humor. There are screenshots showing the gameplay, looking fairly standard karting affair, jumps and bumps in the tracks, and weapon pickups. They point out some of the weapons are a bit iconic, whatever that means for South Park. One screenshot is of Grandpa skidding in his wheelchair, another of someone going over a jump, and another of what they reckon must be the Speedo. In the Q&A section, they're talking about other characters in the game, mentioning Terrence and Philip will have a fart-powered cart, which is exactly what you'd expect, and Jimbo and Ned will be in hunting vehicles with rifles. They also mention no fog in this game, which was apparently a thing in N64 races back then, and thankfully no turkeys either, for some reason. Then there's a bit at the bottom about teachers, and using Vimto in experiments, with a cartoon of a kid getting conked on the head with a can of Vimto to demonstrate gravity. Seems a bit random, but Vimto ads were everywhere back then, weren't they? It's signed by Purple Ronnie, which rings a bell. Some sort of cartoon character from the time. The info burst box says it's coming out in December, and is 128 megabit cartridge, supports 1 to 4 players, rumble and expansion packs, standard N64 stuff. So South Park Rally, looks like it could be a laugh if you're into that sort of thing, probably a decent multiplayer game down the pub with your mates. This page in N64 Magazine back in the day was having a look at Revolt, Acclaim's new radio-controlled car racer. They were saying it was getting close to release and they'd had a proper go on it. Sounded pretty good actually, they thought it was nifty. They were asking if it was like Micro Machines, but reckon it was different to play. Apparently it's got 7 worlds set in real-life places, though not exactly places like the botanical gardens like Micro Machines had. They were saying there's 14 tracks in total, about 2 per world, with a simple one and a trickier one in each. The track editor sounded like the main draw though. You get a big black screen to build your tracks on, chucking down corners and bumps. You could even put power-ups on your own tracks like oil slicks and water balloons and all sorts of crazy stuff. Imagine the chaos. Woo! The info burst box said it was coming out in October, and they seemed pretty hyped for it, giving it 4 out of 5 on their anticipation rating. They said you get 3 tracks to start with, but unlock 14 in total, across 7 different locations. And get this, 28 different radio-controlled cars, all with different stats. They even compared it to Mario Kart, saying it'll have multiplayer modes and battle arenas and all that. Sounds like they were trying to cram everything in, even a tag mode like in Turok 2, Warrington U. Looking at the screenshots, one is in a museum level with a planetarium, another looks like a stunt track. They even pointed out the fog in the distance but said it's not too bad. Another shot showed a tunnel track, and then a funny one with a car that they called one of the rovers from The Prisoner, and quipped, "I am not a number." Bit of a deep cut reference for a kid's game mag, wasn't it? Overall it seemed like they were pretty excited about Revolt and especially the track editor. Could be a laugh, building your own tracks and racing little radio-controlled cars around. This page then is all about a new Duck Dodgers game for the N64. Blimey, Duck Dodgers, that's going back a bit in it. Paradigm, the folks behind F1 World Grand Prix and Pilotwings 64 are developing it, so it's got some pedigree. They're saying it's a 3D adventure game, not just some simple platformer, which sounds a bit more ambitious for the time. Apparently Marvin the Martian is causing trouble by scattering Illudium Fosdex atom collectors all over the place, and Duck Dodgers has to team up with Porky Pig to sort it out across 42 levels. Sounds like a typical cartoon caper, doesn't it? Or there are a few screenshots dotted around. One shows Duck in a pink tree world. Looks a bit basic, to be honest. Very colourful though, bit like a cartoon then I suppose. Another one has him near some ledges, with a caption warning about falling off. Groundbreaking stuff. There's another screen where he looks a bit stunned, maybe he's just realised what game he's in. And lastly, a level gatekeeper, which seems to be a big brown bear fella. Jew. There's an info box calling it Duck Dodgers Burst, saying it's coming from Infogrames. 128 megabit cart size. That's a fair chunk for the N64. 1 or 2 players they reckon. Memory expansion and rumble pack are yes, but no GB pack. Not sure what that's all about, probably some memory thing. Due out in February, they're not even sure what year yet, just TBA, very helpful. Bow. There's a little Q&A section as well. Someone's asking about other Looney Tunes characters, and they're saying planets will have gatekeepers who are familiar faces from the cartoons. Good to know. Then, will Duck be tooled up? Haha, tooled up. Yeah, he'll have a disintegrator pistol, but apparently its usefulness depends on who he's fighting. And he's got 11 moves already, and can jump and climb ropes. Handy, as they say. And on the side, there's a weird cartoon thing about SWATs liking Vimto to help cool down their brains. Bit random, but Vimto's alright I suppose, bit fizzy for me these days. Puts a smile on your face, it says corny. This page then, is having a look at Excitebike 64, which Nintendo were bringing out on the N64. It's looking quite promising actually. They're going on about how it's taking the old Excitebike formula from the NES, and adding bits from other games like Jeremy McGrath's Supercross. There's a Q&A bit where they mention there's going to be 12 tracks in total, a mix of stadium and outdoor stuff, and it sounds like the outdoor tracks are where it's at. They're saying there's a trick system in it too, with 32 tricks, a bit like their own 1080 degrees snowboarding game, which was alright. Tricks aren't just for show either, they can actually help you win races. And get this, there's a track editor as well, like that Revolt game, so you can build your own courses, which is a nice touch. Warranty. The article mentions the graphics looking pretty good, especially the outdoor scenery, comparing it to Top Gear Overdrive in terms of the landscapes, saying it's better, which is fair enough. They're also banging on about something called inverse kinematics for the bike and rider, making it sound like they move realistically and independently from each other, which is probably quite snazzy for the time. In the info box at the bottom it confirms it's from Nintendo obviously, and needs a memory pack, expansion pack and rumble pack, the usual stuff for a big N64 game. They reckon it's out in December, but it's TBA for the UK and Japan, so who knows when we'll actually see it. Overall, it does look like it could be a decent racer. Worth keeping an eye on. This page is a preview of Rayman 2 for the N64. It's being touted as a really pretty 3D platformer, even prettier than Banjo-Kazooie, which were high standards back then on the N64, weren't they? They're saying the graphics are colourful and stylish, and it's shaping up to be a good companion to Mario 64 and Rare's Bear and Bird combo. Bit of pressure then. Ooh. The reviewer mentions that Ubisoft, or Ubisoft as we know them now, are having a go at the 3D platforming genre, making it a bit more action-focused and linear, which could be a good thing or bad thing depending on your tastes. They describe bits of gameplay like flying a small rocket and swamp skiing, pulled by a sea monster, which sounds rather bonkers. There's a Q&A section answering the burning questions, like Rayman, who is he? Apparently he's Ubisoft's version of Mario, and really popular in France. Ginormous even. And yes, Rayman 2 is indeed the 3D sequel, building on the original Rayman game from the PlayStation and Saturn. A decent if basic platformer as they put it. They reckon the camera needs work, which is a classic 3D platformer problem, isn't it? But it has lots of cutscenes and moves for Rayman. Then there's an info burst table giving us the game facts Ubisoft are making it. It's a 128 megabit cart, one player only. Memory and rumble packs are supported but no expansion pack needed. It's slated for a September release, and they've given it a high anticipation rating, 3.5 out of 5 of those little orange balls. And down at the bottom, there's a rather strange cartoon called Posh Girls, by someone called Purple Ronnie, about posh girls drinking Vimto from champagne glasses at dinner parties. Bit random, but I suppose it's a bit of light relief. Splendid drinky, one of them says. Classic. The next page has a look at a couple of games coming to the N64 back in the day. First up is Taz Express, another one of those Looney Tunes games, this time from Infogrames. Apparently it's a 128 megabit cart, one player only, and uses the Memory Park and Rumble Park but not the expansion, or GB Park. Due out in February apparently, and the anticipation rating is pretty high it seems. The reviewer reckons it's an early build, but the graphics are crisp and the frame rate is smooth, which is always good to hear. They mention the camera angle is a bit different, placed higher up which gives you a better view, and that it looks just like a Taz cartoon, which is probably the point. Gameplay sounds like your usual running, jumping and spinning affair, delivering packages for ACME, and bumping into other Looney Tunes characters like Wile E. Coyote and Marvin the Martian. Sounds like a bit of alright 3D platforming fun, not too groundbreaking but decent enough. Then there's Kirby 64. Seems like it was known as Kirby's Air Ride at some point, which is interesting. No confirmation from Nintendo back then apparently, but they'd seen some footage at E3. This one's also from Nintendo, a 128 megabit cart, 1 or 2 players, memory pack but no expansion, Rumble or GB pack. Release dates are TBA for both US and UK, and the anticipation seems decent but not over the top, maybe a bit more cautious this time. YTR. The reviewer thinks it looks like a 2D platformer, maybe with 3D bonus levels, a bit like Yoshi's Story, but hopefully up to the standard of Matza 64, or Banjo-Kazooie, which were the big hitters at the time for platformers, weren't they? They're wondering if there's any chance of a proper 3D Kirby game. They say the 2D style is confirmed from the video footage they saw, but maybe a 3D one is still in the works. It all sounds a bit hush-hush. The screenshots they've got suggest sub-games, and one of them apparently looks a bit like Baby Mario, which is a bit odd. Rumors are going around that it might be a full 3D game like Mario 64, but the E3 footage suggests a 2D side-scrolling style. Sounds a bit confusing to be honest, but we'll see what happens, eh? This page is a look at the magazine getting the jump on the upcoming N64 game Shadow Man. It's in Planet 64 Inches Mag, issue 31 it seems. The headline for the whole section is, The WHITEC. A bit of a weird name, always thought that sounded a bit dodgy even back then, with the tagline, Always First, with news of hideous murderers. Charming, Lungti. Anyway, the editorial is a bit of a strange one. Apparently their usual writer, some bloke called Mr. Guy Miller, has gone AWOL. Seems he's lost the plot a bit at the Miskatonic University Library, which sounds like a made-up place straight out of some horror novel. Instead, this Simon Phipps fella, another chap from Acclaim, has stepped in to give us the lowdown on Shadow Man. They're saying it's going to be frighteningly good, which, knowing Acclaim back then, could mean anything really. There are some screenshots showing off the game. One's got a zombie-looking thing in a place they're calling Deadside, making a egregious error, whatever that means. Another shows more zombies, apparently brought back to life with forbidden knowledge. Bit spooky. Then there's another screenshot from the Temple of Prophecy, showing one of the idols. Apparently there are 4 idols, Anima, Animus, Trickster and the God, which represent the faces of prophecy and are part of the gameplay challenge. They also mention the Retractor Chapel, which is a storehouse for Dread Keys of Infinity. Sounds like typical, over-the-top 90s game nonsense but could be a laugh. The whole thing is signed off by Henry Hepplewhite, editor. Fingers crossed Shadow Man turns out alright, we could always do with a decent spookfest on the N64. This page from the magazine right then, looks like it's all about Shadow Man. It's styled up like a newspaper, calling itself Happel Times, and it's even a final edition. There's a headline shouting, Man Shots exclusive interviews, with some moody screenshots from the game dotted about. They're teasing Shadow Man quite a bit here, saying it'll be a sight for sore eyes, and to look at those effects. One picture is from the Retractor Chapel, in the asylum area, sounding lovely doesn't it? Then another one shows the player character surrounded by some rather nasty looking creatures, described as dead-side-bound wraith creatures. Joy. There's another screenshot of some unpleasant beasts from Deadside. Cheerful stuff all round then. Then there's a section called Designs on Terror, which is all about the game's, well, designs. Apparently, some bloke called Mr. Phipps sent in schematics of the Temple of Prophecy and the Retractor Chapel. They go on about Gad temples and magic tattoos giving Shadow Man abilities, like the Gad Marcher, letting him walk on lava handy in a pinch, I suppose. They mention the Retractor Temple, having a rib cage cracking device that opens up schisms and rotting torsos that act as warp points to liveside. Sounds absolutely delightful, doesn't it? They've got some concept drawings of the Retractor Chapel too, bit like technical blueprints for a torture chamber really. Right at the bottom, in big letters it says next month Shadowman the review. So they are really building it up, aren't they? Making us wait to see if it's actually any good. Typical. August 1999, it says at the bottom, those were the days. This page from Planet Game Boy, right? It's the usual guff about what's new. Big reviews. This issue screams the headline. We've got Conker, that squirrel game from Rare. They were always banging on about how good Rare were back then. Rare's Squirrel Adventure finally arrives and it's great. It says, bit over the top, in it. Then there's Spy Hunter. Midway retro chic, sounds like they're running out of ideas. News blares out next to a picture of Sonic. Guess who's joining the GB party? Shock news inside. Hardly shock news, was it? Sonic was everywhere. Game Boy art, celebrity customized consoles, plus more of that celebrity nonsense. Then win. Get your own original GB design manufactured and sold by Nintendo. Imagine that. Plus, next to some dodgy looking multi-carts, and then piracy. Ah, Jim lad, there be dodgy folk flogging knocked off carts, exposed. Like piracy was a new thing. And another win for a brand new game with your GB camera pics. Right, issue 6, August 99. Where did the time go? This page is the contents for the Game Boy section. Right then, let's see what we've got. Welcome to Planet Game Boy. The editor's bit mentions they've added a few extra pages this month. Fancy that. They're banging on about Rare's Mr. Nuts again. Says it's finally finished after delays. Something about Zelda proportions, whatever that means. Reviews-wise it mentions Buster Move 4. And Lucky Luke, fair enough, not exactly groundbreaking stuff, but Buster Move is always a decent puzzle game, I suppose. And Lucky Luke, isn't that a cowboy cartoon? They're talking about Top Software. And mentioning Mario Deluxe and Conker's Pocket Tales. Yeah, those were alright, weren't they? And then they mention avoiding duffers like Oddworld and Bug's Life. Bit harsh maybe, but each to their own. Oh, and they are going on about Game Boy Color. And new hardware, obviously. Bororo. Then there's Art of Boys. Sounds a bit dodgy. Oh, it's a competition where you can win to have your own Game Boy design made into a limited edition. Preview section is just top titles coming soon. Typical preview section, got a few screenshots of games, nothing jumping out yet. Reviews as mentioned, Buster Move 4 and Lucky Luke, starting on page 42. Game Boy Underworld, hoisting the Jolly Roger, bit dramatic, about the dark side of Game Boy, and a picture of one of those dodgy multi-carts, GB 290-1. Probably full of shovelware, but we all had one, didn't we? Tips and scores, Mario and MK4 on the same page. Page 48, that'll be Mario games then. And finally, Game Boy Gallery, top quality freakage. Starting on page 50, sounds like some weird fan art section, let's hope it's not too grim. Right at the bottom it says issue 6, August 1999, editor Martin Kitts, and lists a load of contributor names, Tim Weaver, Will Overton, Andrea Ball, Justin Webb, Paul Edwards, and Pete Travers. Blimey, that's a lot of names. And the address for Planet Game Boy if you wanted to write them a letter, I suppose. 30 Monmouth Street, Bath, BA12BW. There you go, all present and correct. This page has got a right mix of things going on. Typical magazine fodder, really. Kicking off, there's a bit about Sega. Blimey, Sega of all companies, joining the Dream Team. Seems like they're going to start making games for other consoles now. After their handheld, the Game Gear, didn't exactly set the world alight. First game mentioned is Sakura Tyson, apparently a well-regarded Saturn RPG, and they're doing a Game Boy version. Wonder how that'll turn out. Quite a step down in power, in it. Then there's some guff about Pika vs Mickey. Apparently Nintendo might be getting into theme parks, properly ambitious stuff, taking on Disney, no less. They're talking about a Pokemon theme park in Kyoto, rides based on games like Pokemon Snap, the works. Seems a bit far-fetched, but who knows, no less. Next up, the dreaded Pokemon Gold delayed. Oh yes, remember that, we were all waiting for Pokemon Gold and Silver, weren't we? And of course they've pushed it back. September now for color versions, after the Japanese got it ages ago. Apparently there's 250 monsters. You can move your old ones over, and even breed them. Breeding Pokemon? Sounds a bit odd, even for Pokemon. They've got new monsters like Mariru to try and distract us from Pikachu. Yeah right, Labaga. Lastly there's a bit about Grey Pikachu. Seems like Nintendo are a bit slow on getting the Red Hot game out over here, but CA Games are importing it. They sold loads of imported copies of Pokemon already. Apparently there's a big grey market for it. Massive interest in the game. Official release is in October, but if you're desperate you can ring CA Games and get your import fix. Madness, really. All this fuss over some pocket monsters. This page right then, it's all about Art of Boys. And no, not what you're thinking, it's about Game Boys, the old brick ones, getting a bit of an artistic makeover. Apparently they reckon the Game Boy is still massively popular, even back then, with millions sold, including the color versions. So they've got artists doing up Game Boys as art pieces, like Fakane. They're auctioning off these custom Game Boys, some even done by celebrities, to raise money for kids' charities. If you've got a bit of spare cash, you could actually bid on one, but you'd have to be quick. The auction ends on July 24th. And if you're a bit strapped for cash, like most of us were back then, you could enter a competition to get your own design made by Nintendo, which sounds alright if you're feeling creative. First up is Goldie, remember him? Jungle artist, proper legend in his own right. His Game Boy is supposed to be like a New York subway train, all pink and blue paint splatters, and his signature all over it. They reckon it's a proper collector's item, which, yeah, probably is for some die-hard Goldie fan. Then there's Pete Fowler, who they say was known for some dodgy drug-based ad campaign. Bit controversial apparently. His Game Boy is a bit mental looking, all eyeballs and weirdness. They reckon it's so disturbing it'll give you nightmares after a Tetris session. Cheers for that, Pete. Lastly, there's Noki, a Japanese bloke who's into recycling and making art from old junk. His Game Boy comes with a padded case and a bag, proper fancy, and they reckon Nintendo might even make official stuff based on it. They're a bit worried about a mark on the screen though, typical isn't it? Rue. So yeah, arty Game Boys. Bit of a weird one, but I suppose it's for a good cause. And who knows? Maybe one of these monstrosities is worth a few quid now, you never can tell with these things. This page showcases a cool competition Planet Game Boy is running, asking readers to design their own limited edition Game Boy. Imagine if you were a bit handy, you could have your design made into a real one-off Game Boy, which is pretty neat. The top prize is your custom Game Boy being made, plus entry into some national finals, whatever they are, and the second prize is a Game Boy Color and a game. Not bad at all, and then there are some new Game Boy games for the next few runner-ups. To enter you needed to get your designs in by August 16th, and they'd be printing the winners in the November issue of N64 Mag, which would be out in early October. You had to send your creations to some address in Bath. The page also shows off some custom Game Boy designs to give you ideas. There's one called Stash, which is by some New York graffiti artist, quite understated with stenciled designs. Then there's Pablo Chappelle, who's apparently from Dyson, and he's created a Game Boy with handcuffs and wing mirrors, which is a bit odd, something about not forgetting your Game Boy and staring at people on the train. Alright then. Inflate is a blow-up rubbery Game Boy case, like those inflatable chairs from back in the day, based on arcade machines, a bit gimmicky maybe. Finally, there's Futura, by another street artist, all speckled and splattered, a bit more out there. You can see some games pictured too: Zelda, Link's Awakening DX and Top Gear Rally, both cracking games for the Game Boy Color at the time. Zelda was always a must-have, and Top Gear Rally was decent racing on the go. Good times. This page in Planet Game Boy starts off with a look at Revelations, the Demon Slayer, from Atlas. It's a Game Boy Color game coming out in July, and it sounds like they're trying to mix Pokemon with those old Final Fantasy Legend games. Apparently you can talk to monsters to get them to join you, and even breed them to make new ones, which is a bit different, isn't it? The screenshots make it look very much like Pokemon in the caves. Ruh. Then we've got Disney's Tarzan from Activision, also for Game Boy Color. This one's out in August, timed with the Disney film of course. They're saying it's got 15 levels of jungle platforming action, which is probably what you'd expect from a Tarzan game. Loads of swinging about and shouting like a loon. Looks fairly standard fare, but the kids will probably love it. Warrington. Lastly, there's Ants from Infogrames, again Game Boy Color and out in autumn. Another film time, this time with the Ant movie. They're trying to big it up, saying it's a classy platformer like Looney Tunes but with giant ants and that Woody Allen fella doing the voice, well, not on the Game Boy obviously. Looks alright in the screenshots, typical side-scrolling platformer, nothing there to set the world on fire but might be a bit of fun. This page has a look at a couple of belting games coming out for the old Game Boy. First up is NHL Blades of Steel from Konami. They reckon it's going to be a cracker on the Game Boy Color. And about time too, as there aren't many decent ice hockey games on the N64, let alone the Game Boy. They're saying it'll have all the usual bits and bobs, like player creation and two-player link-up, which is always good for a laugh with your mates. Looks like the graphics are pretty chunky, you can barely see the puck in the screenshots they've used, which they even point out themselves with a bit of a sarcastic comment. They're hoping the puck will be easier to see in the actual game. They reckon it'll be better than NBA Jam, and definitely not another NFL Blitz, which they clearly weren't fans of. Boy. Then there's R-Type DX from Nintendo and Bit Studios. Apparently it just missed the review section deadline for this month. It's a shoot 'em up, and they're saying it's got 5 versions of R-Type 2 in it, plus the original R-Type. So loads of blasting action then. It's for both color and proper old monochrome Game Boys. The screenshots show some pretty decent graphics for a Game Boy, with big bullets and detailed backdrops. They seem impressed with the 3D view of your spaceship and the bosses. Reckon it's a proper peach of a game. They're promising a full review next month after they've had a proper go on all 5 play modes, so that sounds promising. This page is a review for Conker's Pocket Tales on the Game Boy, harking back to when we actually read magazines for our game info. It's a rareware game, so back then you knew it would probably be decent. Given their N64 stuff, they're saying it's been a long time coming, and they were keen to finally get their hands on it. The review reckons it's got a bit of a Zelda vibe, with puzzles and exploring, but it's aimed at a younger audience. They mention Conker's girl Berry getting kidnapped by the evil acorn. Classic stuff. It's a scrolling screen game, and they say it's better than Quest for Camelot, which is a bit faint praise to be honest, haha. They reckon it's got humour in it, and some bits where Conker's in prison, which sounds a bit odd for a kid's game now I think about it. Looking at the screenshots you can see the little squirrel chap running about. There's one bit in a forest, another near a giant cactus, and what looks like a westerny kind of town populated by acorns. Proper bonkers stuff. They've also highlighted some of the mini-games. Gold Rush where you're fishing, a shootout, and targets. They seem to think it's pretty good overall, saying it's charming and varied, and definitely playable, so not a complete stinker then. They've got their little rating system at the top, talking about 5 stars being essential, and 1 star being utter rubbish, so you can get the general gist of where they stand with it. Yeah, Conker on the Game Boy, those were the days. This page has a review of Conker's Pocket Tales on the Game Boy Color, and it seems like they're quite taken with it. They're talking about party invites, which are like skulltulas from Zelda, hidden about the place, and if you're a completionist you'll want to hunt them down for a party apparently. Sounds a bit daft, but there you go. They reckon it's a good 20 hours of gameplay to get through it all, which back then for a Game Boy game was pretty decent. Then there's a bit about the creatures featured, showcasing some of the enemies you'll bump into. We've got the evil acorn, Conker's nemesis naturally, and good acorns that give you hints and might become food later. There's a cow stuck behind a fence, which they think is just scenery but a bit creepy looking. Wizards, mice which are clockwork and nasty, blobs that are squidgy jelly things, and spiders that explode in a puff of smoke, described as endearing for some reason, twitchy legs and bulging eyes and all. Sounds like your typical platformer critters but for the Game Boy. Finally, they touch on the dual format of the game. Apparently the cartridge is massive for a Game Boy game, and that's because it's got 2 versions of the game on it, one for the Game Boy Color and one for the old monochrome brick. Depending on which Game Boy you've got, you get different graphics and controls. They even warn you not to swap between different Game Boys while playing, or you'll lose your save data, which would be a right pain. Clever idea though, catering to both audiences at the time. Overall it seems like they think it's a good game, especially for a Game Boy Color title. This page is a review section from a gaming mag. Looks like they're having a gander at a couple of Game Boy titles. First up is Spy Hunter / Moon Patrol, a double cart from Midway, costing about 25 quid. Spy Hunter is the main draw, apparently, a fondly remembered driving and shooting arcade game, sort of in the vein of Chase HQ and Vigilante 8, games we might have sunk a few coins into back in the day. You're tearing down the road, weaving through traffic and taking out spies on mopeds. Sounds a bit frantic. They mention upgrading your car by driving into a weapons van, bit like Knight Rider apparently, and using ice as a weapon. The reviewer reckons Moon Patrol is less cool, but still pretty good fun. Both are driving and shooting games, side-scrolling, and there's talk of hovering aliens and potholes. Controls are simple: jump, accelerate and shoot, and it's a timed run between checkpoints. They've given it a solid 4 stars, saying it works well on the Game Boy and is worth buying if you fancy a bit of retro arcade action on the go. Then there's Lucky Luke from Infogrames, a bit cheaper at 20 quid, and it's a password jobby, no link up or color. Infogrames, they made some nice looking Game Boy games back then like Looney Tunes. This Lucky Luke game is a Wild West cartoon platformer, set in a tweetyless zone apparently, whatever that means. They describe Lucky Luke as a rootin' good old boy, but reckon he looks more like a Milky Bar kid gone a bit Lee Van Cleef mad dog. Gameplay wise he climbs, leaps, swings about and even crouches outside ladies' toilet windows. Cheeky! He's got a 6-shooter to pop caps in slumbering Mexicans who then drop their trousers. Bit of a strange sense of humor there. Apparently you recover lost objects and other nonsense, but the reviewer says it's well programmed and stunning to look at for a Game Boy game, and a good laugh while it lasts. Another 4 stars for Lucky Luke, so both games getting a decent nod. Looks like a good page for Game Boy owners wanting some new games to play on their brick. This page has a couple of Game Boy reviews. Let's have a look. First up, it's Pocket Bomberman, which they're keen to point out isn't a proper Bomberman game, more like Wario Blast apparently, which is a bit of a dig. It's 20 quid, no link up, but it is in colour, and out now. Sounds like your standard Bomberman affair, bombing enemies in scrolling levels, power-ups, the usual. They say it's a bit repetitive, but fine for a Bomberman fix on the go, gave it 3 out of 5 stars, so not exactly setting the world on fire then. Then there's Bust-A-Move 4, also £20, no link up, colour, and out now too. They're making a point about it being in colour, which back then for a Game Boy game was still a big deal I suppose. Apparently this one's a bit different, with bubbles suspended in 2 clusters connected by a pulley. Sounds a bit fancy for Bust-A-Move. They reckon colour is essential for this game, and it's better than the monochrome versions, naturally. Crisp graphics and familiar gameplay are mentioned, saying it's good for the Game Boy, but not quite Tetris DX levels of greatness. They gave it 4 stars, so a bit better than Pocket Bomberman at least. Not bad for a bit of handheld puzzling I reckon. This page dives into the murky world of Game Boy piracy, calling it the GB underworld. It's all about these dodgy game cartridges that have been knocking around since the Game Boy was in its prime. Apparently 10 years on, these bootleg games are still a thing. The article mentions how these carts, often from Hong Kong, are churned out using cheap parts, kind of taking the biscuit out of Nintendo's official stuff. They even talk about duty-free shops in Hong Kong being a source of these pirate games. It's funny to think about it now, you could probably get more games than you knew what to do with on one of those multi-carts. They're reviewing a game called Mario 4, which is clearly a knockoff. They're wondering what Shigzy, meaning Shigeru Miyamoto of course, would make of it. The reviewer reckons it looks familiar, using graphics nicked straight from Mario Land 2. They play it and say it's just average, a bit of a shock compared to the real Mario magic. There's a bit of sarcasm about how lucky we are to have proper Nintendo games, and to thank Shigzy for that, hinting this fake is a bit naff. There are screenshots of Mario 4 inches showing it in action, and another with Yoshi looking a bit lost and saying he's wondering how he got there, which is a bit of a laugh. They've also got a picture of one of those GB290IN1 cartridges, you know, the ones with loads of games crammed on them. It's all a bit of a reminder of how things were back then with the Game Boy, before everything was so official and online. This page is having a bit of a giggle at the dodgy end of the Game Boy market, which was rife back then. First off, there's this game called Monster Go! 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 Which is clearly trying to cash in on Pokemon's mega popularity. They even point out it's not an official Pokemon product, as if we couldn't tell by the ropey-looking Pikachu and Charmander clones on the box art. Apparently it's a terrible game made by some pirates in Hong Kong, just ripping off Nintendo's characters. Warinol. Then there's this gadget called the GB Exchanger. Bit of a cheeky device this, lets you copy your Game Boy games onto your PC. They try to say it's for backing up your games, which is technically legal, but everyone knew what it was really for downloading ROMs off the internet, the Wild West of game downloads back in '99. The magazine is being a bit sarcastic about the legality of it, pointing out no one really needs to back up a Game Boy cart for legitimate reasons, and that it's mostly used for swapping dodgy ROMs online. It's a fair point, and they reckon it's a bit dodgy and harmful to game companies, which yeah, suppose it was. Next up is Sonic 6 inches for the Game Boy. Oh dear, this sounds like a right stinker. Apparently it's just awful, and they're not holding back on saying how bad it is, calling it the only dodgy Sonic GB game we've ever seen. They reckon it disgraces Sonic's name with subpar gameplay and graphics. They even joke about it being so bad it takes ages to be crap. Sounds like one to avoid, even back then when you were desperate for something new to play on your brick of a Game Boy. Lastly, they're having a laugh at these multi-game carts, like GB290IN1. Remember these? They always promised hundreds of games, but it was usually the same few old games repeated, over and over. This one they looked at only had 19 unique games, with the rest just being duplicates. They're saying most were old and small games squeezed onto one chip. Apparently the quality of the cart itself is rubbish too, and it doesn't even work properly on a Game Boy Color. And to top it off, they reckon some of the games are stolen from Rare and Nintendo. Blimey! Sounds like the usual dodgy tat you'd find down the market. This page is having a look at some top tips for a couple of crackers from back then, Super Mario DX on the Game Boy Color, and Mortal Kombat 4 on the N64. For Mario DX it's all about racking up points to get to the proper hard levels, the lost levels, or Super Mario Bros 2 as they call it here, which were a right challenge, weren't they? Apparently, bouncing on shells in level 31 is the way to go to get enough points. You could also play as Luigi by pressing select on the map screen. That was a cool little secret. And if you were really good you could unlock a race against Boo apparently. Something about fireworks depending on the clock too. Bit random. And for extra lives, it seems if you got a rubbish fortune telling card, just keep trying until you get Princess Peach to get 10 lives. Every little helps. Then they move on to Mortal Kombat 4 on the N64. They've got all those combat codes listed out for things like fighting Reptile and getting messages and all sorts of daft things. Remember faffing about with those before a match. And a little tip for extra continues on the tower mode by pressing up on the controller when you pick your difficulty. Handy for when you were getting your backside handed to you by Shinnok. This page, right, it's got a real retro vibe to it, taking me back to the days of squinting at my Game Boy screen. First off, we've got Kirby's Dream Land, bless it. They're showing you how to ramp up the difficulty if you were some kind of gaming masochist, or get more lives if you were, like most of us, constantly getting battered by King Day. Then there's Lucky Luke, the rooting-tooting cowboy, with passwords to tweak the difficulty in music. Not exactly game changers, but hey, every little helps. And blimey, look at this Turok 2 on the Game Boy Color. They're chucking out cheat codes like confetti, level select, all weapons turn into a bird mode, eh? Infinite lives, invincibility. Might as well just watch someone else play it at that point, but for little sods who couldn't handle a challenge, I suppose it was a godsend. V-Rally's there too, with simple passwords to get to the medium and hard stages. Fast and food, very imaginative lads. Then we've got the high scores bit. Tetris DX, Marathon, Ultra, 40 lines. All those classic modes. Seems Paul Bush and Andrew Marriott were battling it out for Tetris supremacy back then, with Naden Kuhn from New Zealand thrown in for good measure. And Game & Watch gallery scores too. Donkey Kong, Parachute, Chef Helmet, proper old school stuff. Alden Knutson and Naden Kuhn cropping up again, they were clearly dedicated gamers. And of course the Game Boy camera scores, Space Fever, Ball Run, all from a Martin Hall in Dover. Blimey Small World, Warrington Doll. And right at the end, they're asking for your scores. Send them into Planet Game Boy, proper old school snail mail address in Bath, and even an email address, n64@futurenet.co.uk. Remember those days? Takes you back, doesn't it? Proper nostalgia trip, this page. This page is all about the Game Boy camera and the frankly bizarre snaps people have been sending in. It's called the Game Boy Gallery, and it's a right laugh looking at the weird and wonderful stuff folk have come up with using that tiny little camera. They've got a winner section, which is some dodgy looking fella from Edinburgh they've called a Chernobyl mutant. Bit harsh maybe. Then there's loads of other photos sent in by readers. There's Jeff Williamson's two-dimensional ladyboy. Right Jeff. Ben Snape's mum gets a mention. Apparently she's beautiful, Debbie. Martin Hall from Dover's sent in some Pikachu action, setting a new high score bet that was riveting viewing on a Game Boy screen. And then Griffin Liederbrand from Australia with some disturbing stuff. Sounds about right. Typical Aussie humour. There's a photo of a goofy face with ME written on it, by Jason Frost, described as hideous Princess Leia. Okay then. And Hadley Bennett's dad, with a mouthful of Boris, spooky ghosts from, presumably, Mario. Michael Scott gets a thanks for a shaggy dog, which looks like, well, a shaggy dog in Game Boy camera form. Sam Monkey is apparently the world's youngest bodybuilder. Good for him, I suppose. Ace Ed Howarth is called a student of contemporary art. And his picture is Modern Scream. Righto. Ruben Larson knows his lighting effects apparently, and Jimmy Arila from Finland is sucking down antifreeze to survive the winter. Cheers, Jimmy. Finally, there's Andrew Wood, who they reckon has a future in horror movies based on his pick. Blimey, quite the collection of oddities. They're asking for more freaks to be sent in. Reckon you could win a game if yours is good enough? Address is there for Planet Game Boy Magazine if you fancy your chances. Madness. This page is all about a big N64 multiplayer shindig. Great multiplayer extravaganza it's called. Bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Looks like it's from issue 34 of the N64 magazine. Can see the logo down in the corner there with number 52 next to it, probably the page number then. Virgin Megastores were in on it too, remember them? Always a good place to pick up your games. The page is a bit of a collage of folks getting stuck into some N64 action. You've got lads with the classic three-pronged controllers, looking properly engrossed in whatever they're playing. Looks like there's a bit of a crowd gathered, all eager to get a go. Up top there's a shot of more people watching on. Proper serious faces, maybe it's a competition or something. Then there's a bloke on a stage with a microphone, probably hyping everyone up, or maybe announcing the winners of a Mario Kart 64 tournament, who knows. Dora. Can't really make out specific game screenshots, it's all a bit grainy, but definitely looks like a good old N64 niece-up. Takes you back to when getting 4 mates around for a GoldenEye or Mario Kart session was the best night in. Simpler times, eh? This page is all about the great multiplayer extravaganza. Bit of a mouthful in it. Apparently on June 3rd, they gathered some of the UK's finest game players down in London, at the Virgin Megastore on Oxford Street, no less. All to find out who was the top dog gamer in the country. Serious business back then, no less. They ran a 6-round competition, Round 1 kicked off with 16 players battling it out on GoldenEye 007 and Turok 2, 4 players at a time. Round 2, the winners moved on to Mario Kart 64 for a 3-race contest. Then it was down to the semi-finals in round 3, with F-Zero X, 2-player best-of 3. There was even a third-place playoff for the losers from round 3, and then the final in round 5 was a 3-game GoldenEye showdown. Round 6, a bonus round, had the overall winner facing off against the N64 Magazine's own experts Tim, Jess, and Martin, in GoldenEye once more. GoldenEye was clearly the star of the show, wasn't it, once? Looking at the games, it's a proper snapshot of the N64 era. GoldenEye, naturally, was a massive multiplayer hit, Mario Kart 64 for the kart racing chaos, F-Zero X for the speed demons, and even Turok 2 made an appearance. Bit of dinosaur blasting action. They even mentioned the launch of Star Wars Episode 1, Racer happening on the same day, can't forget the pod racing hype. Good times, eh? Virgin Megastore, on Oxford Street, that was the gaming hotspot back then. This page from N64 Magazine looks like we're in the thick of some sort of multiplayer tournament, proper late 90s style. It's called Round 1 of the Great Multiplayer Extravaganza. They've got these teams battling it out on the N64, of course, playing some absolute classics. Team 1 seems to have Russell Dawes, Phil Hughes, Andrew Mills and Thomas Suckling. Looks like Phil Hughes might have been cheating in Mario Kart. Cheeky bugger. Games they're playing are GoldenEye. Obviously, can't have a multiplayer N64 do without GoldenEye, can you? Then there's Mario Kart 64, F-Zero X proper fast that one, and Turok 2. Team 1 totaled 39 points across all the games. Team 2 we've got Dee Ramone, Tim Booth, Douglas Whitley, and John Helam. Apparently Douglas and John had a bit of a battle in something, with Douglas winning. They played the same set of games, and their team total is a bit lower at 40 points. Wait no, Team 1 was 39, Team 2 is 40, my mistake. Team 3 features Headley Gabriel, Keith Tannehill, Gary Carney, and Sam Fenwick. Looks like Headley didn't quite make it to the final in something. They're also on the same game rotation, GoldenEye, Mario Kart, F-Zero X and Turok 2, and they clocked up 41 points as a team. So it seems like they are playing these 4 games, points awarded for positions, and then teams are totaled up to see who goes through. Classic N64 multiplayer action right there. GoldenEye and Mario Kart were the big hitters then, F-Zero X for the speed freaks, and Turok 2 for a bit of dinosaur blasting. Good times. This page is all about a multiplayer gaming event, looks like a bit of a tournament thing from the old N64 magazine. It's called the Great Multiplayer Extravaganza, which is a bit much, isn't it? They've got sections for Team 4 and Round 2. Team 4 seems to have been playing a bunch of classics. GoldenEye, obviously everyone was obsessed with that back then. Then Mario Kart 64, F-Zero X for a bit of speed, and even Turok 2, blasting dinos. They've got these little tables showing who came where in each game and how many points they got. David Goodman seems to be doing alright there. Team 4, then Round 2, is all Mario Kart 64 tracks, Koopa Troopa Beach, Mario Raceway and Bowser's Castle proper retro tracks. Looks like different teams for this bit, Team 1 and Team 2. Phil Hughes from Team 1 seems to have cleaned up, getting a good score. David Goodman is back in Team 2 as well, so he's clearly keen. There are some photos of people playing, looking properly engrossed in the screens. One geezer is holding a microphone, probably the host, getting everyone hyped, or at least trying to. It's all very late 90s, isn't it? Reminds you of weekend afternoons trying to cram as many mates as possible around a TV for some 4-player GoldenEye. Good times, weren't they? Though looking at these scores, maybe we weren't quite this competitive. This page then, it's all about the semi-finals and the battle for third place at some kind of N64 multiplayer extravaganza. Looks like they were playing F-Zero X for the semi-finals, good choice for a bit of speed. Team 1 had Andrew Mills up against John Davies, and blimey they played 3 tracks. Silence, Mute City 3 and Big Blue. Andrew won on Silence and Big Blue, so he took that semi. Poor old John lost out there. Team 2 was Phil Hughes against David Goodman, and Phil won, again on Silence and Big Blue, so David was knocked out too. So it was Andrew Mills and Phil Hughes heading to the final it seems. Then there's round 4, the battle for third place with John and David going head to head. Apparently they were going to play GoldenEye for third place using pistols only, and the stack level sounds alright. They even agreed on license to kill mode, 5-minute limit. Bit serious for third place, eh? Seems there was a bit of a cheat happening, with John apparently respawning every time David killed him. Sneaky. So they binned off GoldenEye in the end, and went for Mario Kart Battle Mode. Instead, good choice to settle it fairly, I suppose. The prize was an early copy of Star Wars Episode 1. Racer, not bad for third place, especially back then when everyone was hyped for anything Star Wars related after years of nothing. John Davies won that third place battle in the end, beating David Goodman 32, so there you go, semi-finals, and the third place decider all sorted. Takes me back, GoldenEye and F-Zero X were great multiplayer games back then, good times. This page is about a GoldenEye tournament final, back in the day when the N64 was king. Seems like it was a multiplayer extravaganza event, whatever that was. The final was between two lads, Phil Hughes and Andrew, or Millsy as they called him. They played GoldenEye, best of 3 rounds. The first round was on temple level, with automatics only weapons. Phil won that one. Then, for the second round, Phil got to pick the level, and he went for facility, again with automatics. Apparently he just camped out near the toilet on facility, classic tactic back then. Bit cheap if you ask me, but hey, it worked. Phil won again and took the tournament. Burrijan. For his trouble, Phil got a proper haul of prizes. They're talking a copy of Star Wars Episode 1, Racer on the N64, remember that pod racing game? And 720 degrees skateboarding, which was alright I suppose, but not exactly GoldenEye, was it? He also nabbed a t-shirt, a hat, and £35 of Virgin Megastore vouchers that was decent pocket money back then. Plus he was going to be on Sky TV, which was a big deal back then. Must have been some local cable channel thing, not exactly primetime telly. After that they had a bonus round, where Phil, feeling himself no doubt, took on 3 of the N64 Magazine lads, Jess, Tim and Martin, in a 3-on-1 GoldenEye match. Level was complex, automatics again, and apparently, Phil absolutely rinsed them 60. They were making excuses afterwards, saying complex was the worst level, and that they never play complex. Yeah, we've all been there lads, getting schooled in GoldenEye, and trying to save face. One of them, Will, even chimed in saying Phil was just better than them, which is probably the truth of it. Right at the end there's a bit called Aftermath, saying the whole event was a success, thanks to some bloke called Jonathan Beals. They thanked Nintendo, Acclaim and Virgin Megastores for chipping in with prizes and space. Sounds like it was a good day out for the N64 Massive at the time. This page in N64 Magazine is doing a special investigation on Marines. Remember that one? It was from Acclaim. Looking at these screenshots, it's all about battling these big, nasty, spider-like alien bugs. They're making a point about the AI being quite clever, even getting the bugs to fight each other, which back then was a bit of a novelty, wasn't it? They mention some of the environments you'll be battling through, like sewers, classic bug hunt territory, and these little critters that jump right at your face. Sounds a bit frantic. One screenshot shows a lava pit mishap, clumsy walking. They say we've all been there in games of this era. Another shows an alien river, which is described as purpley blue goo. Very descriptive. Then there's a jump scare moment with a beastie popping out of the water. They say it's a nest, and you're stuck with just a laser gun, no grenades yet. Tough luck, eh? In the info burst box it says it's a 128 megabit cart, supports up to 4 players, and uses all the packs, memory, expansion, rumble, standard fare for the time. No Game Boy pack support though. Release date was set for November in the UK and US, Japan was TBA. And they've given it 4 out of 5 red dots for anticipation. So, it was looking quite promising back in issue 31. Spiders and lasers, what's not to like for a bit of N64 action? This page from N64 Magazine features a preview of the game Armoridines. Seems like Acclaim London, who used to be Probe, are behind this one. Apparently it's built on the same engine as Turok 2, which is alright I suppose. They're banging on about battlesuits and loads of bugs to shoot. They reckon you get to play as 2 characters, Tony Lewis and Myra Lane, or Tone and Myra to their mates apparently. Tone gets claws, a shotgun, and a missile launcher. Myra's more of a taser, machine gun, and grenade launcher type of gal. The reviewer is quite impressed that the weapons morph out of the battlesuits, which sounds a bit nifty. There are a couple of screenshots showing some insect-looking critters and explosions. They mention it's got a Starship Troopers vibe, which, alright, could be a bit of fun. The reviewer seems to think it's got a good environment and proper weapons, and they're calling it a dark horse for 99. We'll see about that, won't we? It's out in August 1999, according to the bottom there. This page then is an N64 special investigation feature called Bugcatcher, and it's all about the game Marines, which looks proper scary. They've broken it down into 8 steps on how to deal with these massive spider-bug things. Step 1. You're right in the nest and can hear the squealing before they pop out of the hole. Charming. Number 2 points out that these bugs are not just big but clever, they'll hunt you down and leap at you apparently. Step 3 talks about your armoring suit coming with standard weapons, a laser, and a charge rifle. Bottom off the range, but still useful, according to the mag. Number 4. They reckon it's a nice touch when you zap a bug with the charge gun and it flips over and fizzles. Bit grim, innit? Power. Step 5 suggests that if you kill a baby bug, mummy bug gets proper angry, and a massive spider thing rises out of the dust. Best tactic? Leg it! Step 6. Apparently gunfire attracts even more of these 8-legged beasties. Gulp is right. Anybugger. Number 7. They don't hang about, they'll be on you in a flash and dig their claws in. Ouch. And finally, Step 8. Time to get the missile launcher out, described as unspectacular but pretty effective. Ammo goes quick though, apparently. So yeah, Armorines. Looks like a right tense shooter where you're up against these giant clever bugs. Sounds like a bit of a panic-inducing affair. Proper N64 stuff back then. This page is an article from a gaming mag. Looks like it's having a bit of a poke around at this new game called Armorines. Apparently they're promising bigger explosions in the final version, like proper Turok-style GIBS, which sounds about right for the time. It seems you're heading into an Egyptian temple level, which means a change of scenery, and apparently they're changing up the look of the bugs too, which is a nice touch, I suppose. They mention there's a fair bit of fog in the current build, but they reckon they'll tone it down for the finished game, and even let you mess with the fog settings, which is a bit odd, but alright. Just after the Sphinx you get to the Egyptian temple, which is supposed to be even more tense with darker bits and echoey sounds, and squealing bugs. Lovely. Oh great, and now we've got cockroaches in the mix. Apparently they scuttle about at knee height and are a bit sneaky to deal with. Sounds like they're trying to make them a bit tougher than the usual cannon fodder. And then there's Mum, some kind of big spider thing it looks like, creeping up behind you thanks to these Armorines. The advice is to back away and shoot. Classic tactic really, making sure you don't bump into anything when you're legging it backwards. Finally, it's all about the bosses. Bigger, stronger, nastier bugs. They're meant to be clever too, using cover and shadows. Proper intelligent battle tactics, so they say. But the special thing about these bosses is you can shoot their face off and see their skull, which is a bit grim, even for me. Nasty. This page right then, it's an Eternal Darkness special investigation. Must be about that new game Armorines Project Swarm on the N64. Blimey, Eternal Darkness. Sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? Anyway, seems like they're saying it's going to be the N64's finest moment. Bit strong that, but alright. They're saying if you like your games with plenty of gore and splattering bugs, this is the one. Apparently it's even gorier than Perfect Dark, which is a bold claim. They're looking at different levels. They've got alien ship, sewers, tree, and the hive. Alien ship is apparently like something out of the Alien films. Classic. Sewers is all about twisty passages and tension. Sounds like standard sewer level fare. Tree is taking you up a bug-filled treehouse, harking back to the original Turok apparently. And the hive is like the hives in Turok 2, right in the thick of the bug action. Then there's a bit about taking to the skies. Seems like there's a helicopter bit in the game. They're saying it moves a bit slowly but gives a good viewpoint and targeting system, a bit like Perfect Dark. Apparently the best bit is lobbing grenades into bug holes and watching them scuttle out. They're banging on about a lock-on system and bugs squealing in pain. Great stuff, as they say. A bit much, but each to their own. Jicky. Looking at the screenshots, you've got the usual first-person view, shooting at these spider-like bugs. One bit shows them crawling up walls, another bit is in a sandy pit, presumably the hive. And there's a close-up of the helicopter gun sight, and some bugs running about. They're pointing out a plucky young bug who fancies his chances, and another one who doesn't. He, very funny magazine. Still, looks like a decent enough bug blaster for the N64, might be one to keep an eye on if you're into that sort of thing, I suppose. This page is a look at Armorines, coming to the N64, from what must be an issue from '99. Right then, Armorines, it's all about blasting bugs in cooperative mode, which they reckon is where it's really gonna shine. Visually they are saying it's a step up from Turok 2, with a wider view which is always welcome. Apparently some folks moaned about Turok 2's massive levels, so Armorines is going for smaller, more action-packed ones, across 5 worlds and 20 missions in total. They mention it's got a bit of a GoldenEye vibe in places visually, and explosions are promised to be even bigger and better in the finished game, naturally. Weapons-wise, it sounds like your typical bug blasting kit. Claws, missile launcher, nothing too fancy to start. Then you get laser guns and alien staffs. Weapons can be powered up through the levels, and you get points for causing mayhem and finding secrets, all the usual stuff. They are drawing comparisons to Starship Troopers in terms of the bug blasting action, and Duke Nukem 64 for the coupe mode, which, to be fair, Duke Nukem did alright on the N64. Apparently each level starts and ends with a cutscene, and they're promising animated sequences, though maybe not quite as slick as Perfect Dark or Turok 2. It's coming on a 128 megabit cartridge, which they say might limit the fancy cutscenes a bit. They think it's shaping up to be a better game than Turok 2, which is a bold claim, but we'll see. Overall, it sounds like it could be a decent blast, especially with a mate. This page is a special investigation into Jet Force Gemini, the latest game from Rare, those clever chaps up in Twycross. You've got a big splash image of the game with those colourful characters and a yellow dog bloke, all looking very futuristic with their weapons. The info box gives you the lowdown. It's from Rare, of course. A chunky 128 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players, no memory puck needed. Expansion puck maybe, rumble puck yes, and no Game Boy puck, whatever that would have been for. Release is down as September, but TBA, so typical, still a bit vague then. And they've given it a full 5 red blob anticipation rating, so someone's clearly excited. The blurb at the bottom is a bit cheeky, saying their special investigations take them all over the world. But this month, it's only as far as Twycross. Bit of a poke at themselves, I suppose, Rare being just down the road for them, really. Still, Jet Force Gemini, Rare, N64. It was always going to get some attention back then, wasn't it? This page is all about Jet Force Gemini, looking at the weapons in this new shoot-'em-up. Right then, blood on the tracks. A bit dramatic for a bug hunt, isn't it? They are showing off all the different ways you can blast these insectoid blighters. First up is the shuriken, described as like the razor wind from Turok 2, so you can imagine it's going to slice and dice those insect heads off. Lovely stuff, as they say. Beetele. Then the machine gun, your standard space cadet's best friend. Rapid fire and automatic, just what you need for bug slaying, apparently. Can't go wrong with a machine gun, can you? Warrington gun. Next, the pistol. Standard issue, reliable, and good for putting goo on walls. Sounds charming. Slow rate of fire but packs a wallop, they reckon. There's a bonus multiple lock-on thing. Lock on to a couple of enemies, let the shuriken fly, and watch the decapitated insect corpses hit the ground. Slicey. Alright, we get it, it's violent. The plasma gun is next, described as pretty and inventive. Like those streamer rifles from Ghostbusters, apparently. Envelops enemies in energy until they explode. Absolutely stunning. Bit much, isn't it? Yeah. Homing rocket launcher. Another weapon that uses Rare's fondness for locking on, pinpoint accuracy, and takes out anyone in close proximity to the target. Sounds like a bit of fun. Hours of fun with this little beauty. Calm down, lads. Finally, the hand grenade. Never before has a grenade wreaked such pretty violence. Iridescent blue shockwaves and body parts flying. Right then, a grenade. What's new? So yeah, weapons of Jet Force Gemini, looking like a bit of a blast fest in space. Coming August 99. Seems like they are quite keen on it. This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at Jet Force Gemini. Right then, another blaster for the old N64. Seems like we were spoilt for them back then. They're saying it's a turbo-charged version of Body Harvest, which was that other Rare game. This one, Jet Force Gemini, is looking like it could be the top-down shoot-'em-up to beat all others apparently. The reviewer reckons it's not an exaggeration to say that. BJ. They are talking about the graphics, saying it's got amazing detail and moves with a speed that's unbelievable, and they are banging on about the weapons, reckons they are going to outdo Turok 2, in terms of devastation, balance and all-round graphical whiz-bangery. Bit much, isn't it? Still, Turok 2 did look pretty good at the time, so if this is better then fair enough. Choo! There are some screenshots showing the game in action. Looks like you're running around in a forest level, and shooting at these insect-like alien things. Apparently there's a level in a wood with fluffy, Ewok-style aliens that you have to protect. Sounds a bit daft. They mention you'll be up against Mizar's troops, who aren't too keen on letting you finish your mission. Apparently some of these bad guys are cute, but have got big guns charming. There are also some airborne robot enemies that swoop in, and jet-powered droids chasing you about. One of the screenshots shows an underwater bit, saying that swimming is Vela's special skill. And another shows Juno with his flying robot chum Floyd the droid. It mentions the camera system is like Duke Nukem, 0 Hour and Jet Force Gemini, and how it deals with camera problems when you get near walls. Apparently it's all very smooth. They're saying Jet Force Gemini is going to be a game for $19.99, and hopes it will put smiles on millions of faces worldwide when it's released, hopefully in September. The game slipped again, it says, so who knows when we'll actually see it. They also mention Donkey Kong 64 and Perfect Dark are coming out in November and December respectively, so Rare were proper busy, weren't they? They are tweaking Juno, Vela and Lupus, who I assume are the characters you play as. Sounds like you'll need to get to grips with each of them to complete the 120 stages. Lupus can fly with paw-mounted rockets apparently, which sounds a bit bonkers. They are saying it's going to be a meaty single-player challenge and will have multiplayer too. Right, sounds alright actually, might be worth a look when it eventually comes out. This page of the mag is all about Jet Force Gemini, which was looking pretty tasty back then. Surprise Attack, they've called it, and it's basically a run-through of a level, showing off different bits and bobs. They start with these single Force Gemini lads leading you into a trap, classic rare trickery, eh? Then suddenly you're swamped by drone bugs. Apparently Jet Force's handgun is simple to use, which is always a bonus when you're getting rushed. Ow. They make a big deal about the enemy AI, saying they work together, offering cover fire and circling behind you. Sounds a bit fancy for the N64, but we'll see. Then there are these phalanxes of flying robots, and even they split up and change attack patterns. Getting a bit carried away maybe? Peutai. They point out Vela's rolling move, which is handy for dodging. And they're saying you can crawl on your belly to avoid getting shot using the terrain and all that. Very tactical apparently. It seems like you're constantly outnumbered, but they hint at finding heavier weaponry later on, which is good because being outgunned isn't much fun. Then you reach a village that's crawling with insect soldiers, Mizar's insect soldiers to be precise, and some hostages. Always hostages. They suggest scanning around as bugs attack from all angles, and that well-placed shots are key. There are some bits in boxes mentioning goo everywhere, and some character called Jeff who's a furry good guy. Right then, it mentions multiplayer too, deathmatch, capture the flag, co-op, and even a racing game mode with Wipeout-style hoverships. Sounds like they're throwing everything at it, don't they? They reckon Jet Force Gemini is getting better and better each month, and they'll have more on it soon. August 99, so not long to wait, I suppose. To be continued. Typical magazine cliffhanger. This page in N64 Magazine is all about Premier Manager 64. Blimey, remember that one? It was supposed to be the N64's first proper football management game, and they're giving their verdict on it. The page is plastered with the word Arena in massive red letters, very bold as you'd expect from N64 Magazine back then. There's a screenshot from the game at the top, bit blocky as you'd expect from the N64, showing a match between Manchester City and Wrexham, 0-0, thrilling stuff. Below that, big green letters shout, Premier Manager 64. There's also a picture of a fella, looks like a football manager type, in a tracksuit, maybe supposed to be the in-game manager model or something. Down the side, they've got their guide to scoring, explaining how they rate games. Apparently because N64 cartridges were so pricey back then, they didn't just slap a score on games lightly, they played them properly, right through to the end, and made sure they were giving you your money's worth. They've got a star system for top games, the Star Game Award for 85% and above, meaning it's top-notch and essential. Then there's different colored balls for different score ranges. Yellow for 85% plus, blue for 8,470%, green for 6,950%, red for 4,920%, and grey for 190%. Sounds like they've got it pretty much covered. On the right side, they explain how it works. Team 64, being gaming experts apparently, play the games, finish them, and then write it all up in a clear and entertaining way. Underneath that, they explain what their scoring categories mean. Visuals, obviously about the graphics, asking if it's got those GOBS macking graphics the N64 could do. Sounds, if the tunes are any good or best left muted. Mastery, how well the game used the N64's hardware, which was a big deal at the time. Remember all the hype about the 64 bits? Lifespan, if you'll get weeks of play, or if it'll get boring quickly. And finally verdict, which is how much fun you'll have overall, and that's tied to the scores on the left. So overall, it's a typical N64 magazine page. Bold, colourful, getting you hyped for the game, but also trying to be a bit serious about reviewing. Premier Manager 64, eh? Wonder what score it got. Hopefully not grey ball territory. This page in N64 Magazine, right? It's got a bunch of game reviews and a bit of a feature called Team 64. Kicking off with Shadowgate 64, described as a first-person RPG, wandering around corridors. Doesn't sound too thrilling, to be honest. Then there's Superman. They reckon it's the worst game ever. Or pretty close, which isn't exactly a glowing recommendation, is it? No. Next up, it's Mario Golf. Pretty boring is how they start, but then say Mario changes that. Always with the Mario, eh? There's A Bug's Life, another movie game tie-in, and Fighting Force, which they're calling a stinking PlayStation port. Ouch. Looks like they weren't too impressed with that one. The big thing on the page is Team 64. Apparently their N64 football management game has been a hit, so they're challenging other magazines. Bit of a laugh. They've got photos of the team members with little write-ups for each. Pete Travers is the oldest man at 84, apparently bafflingly attractive to women. Will Overton is the manager, like Ron Atkinson in a tracksuit. Paul Edwards plays guitar and wanted a shampoo commercial. Andrea Ball, poor girl, slipped during the photo shoot and ended up with her face on a football. Jess Bickham apparently breaks greenhouses. Martin Kitts is the hard man collecting skulls. Justin Webb is a creative midfielder or someone poncing about. And Tim Weaver, the captain, sounds like he rates himself a bit too much, apparently a hit with the ladies. Each of them has a game of the month listed, mostly Mario Golf, but a couple are PM64 and one is Superman. Madness. Right bit of fun this page. This page in N64 Magazine is taking another look at Premier Manager 64. Seems they gave it a first go back in issue 29. They're saying it's a step up from the old management games, where you were just staring at numbers all day. At least now you get to see some dodgy highlights and goals, even if it's just your defenders messing up. Yeah, there's a bit showing you the career team selection. You know, picking your club. It's got teams like Barnet and Brentford, with different aims like getting promoted or just trying not to get relegated. That old chestnut. It mentions that's the career mode where you choose who to manage. Warrantis. Then there are some game shots. One is Everton playing Arsenal, with a caption about Overmars trying to rescue the Arse from being beaten 10-bit cheeky. Another shot shows Arsenal versus Inter Milan. The main chunk of the page is all about Premier Manager finally landing on the N64. Apparently even Keegan's got his name to it. Remember when he was the big manager? They reckon it looks and sounds alright for the N64. Sounds like it's still got some of the same issues it had on the PlayStation, which is a bit of a shame. They're moaning about the computer changing your team and you having to swap players about all the time. Oh, and the Champions League is in it, apparently a good way to get the sack in the game. But overall, they seem to like it, calling it a fantastic feast of football, maybe laying it on a bit thick there. There's a little info box with the details. Made by Gremlin, 128 meg carts, just one player. Saves on the cartridge, no rumble or expansion pack stuff. Says it was meant to be out in July in the UK and cost 40 quid, ouch, that was a lot back then. Borrington. And lastly, a picture of the team tactics screen, with a 442 formation and a list of Arsenal players. Seaman, Dixon, Winterburn, Hughes, Adams, Keown, Parloa, Vieira, Bergkamp, Anelka, and Ljungberg. That's a blast from the past, that Arsenal team. Page 70, issue 31 of the mag. This page is a look at Premier Manager 64. Feels like a bit of a deep dive into the game. It's calling it the hardest game in the world, which is a bit much, probably just magazine hyperbole back then. It's set over 4 hard winter months in the game, November, so right in the thick of the football season. They're talking about the challenges of being a manager in the game, starting badly and being down the bottom of the league sounds familiar from many a real-life season. They mention getting beat 52 at home by Wigan, which is a right pasting. There are bits about player transfers and the chairman getting on your back about wages, classic stuff. It mentions having to sell players to buy players, the usual financial juggling act in management games. It's highlighting the transfer market aspect, with names like Ricardo Shimeka mentioned as a target defender with a hefty £3.5 million price tag. There's also talk about camera angles in the game, which was probably a big deal back then, and player contracts. The screenshots are showing in-game action and menu screens, the kind of thing you'd expect from a football management game. The reviewer seems to be saying that despite the difficulties, it's quite in-depth and engaging, especially the transfer market. It mentions Ian Dowie as a potential cut price signing, a blast from the past that is. Overall, it's a preview of what the game is like to play, focusing on the nitty-gritty of being a football manager. It does feel very much of its time, all about stats and spreadsheets, but that was the charm of these games back then, wasn't it? This page then, it's from N64 Magazine, must be back in '99 sometime. Looks like we're delving into the world of football management on the N64, with Player Manager 64. Honestly, I remember this game. It was alright for the time if you were really into your footy. Pallier. So in December, it sounds like our reviewer Tim Weaver is managing Man City, and things are a bit touch and go. They've had a couple of losses but managed to climb out of the relegation zone, up to 16th. The chairman's putting the pressure on, naturally. He's gone and signed Ian Dowie, remember him? Bit of a journeyman striker, for a hefty wedge, 12 grand a week, plus a signing fee. Apparently he's still a bit knackered, despite banging in goals for QPR, so the reviewer is fiddling with the training to get him match fit, focusing on fitness rather than skill, which seems fair enough. He's wondering if he should give Dowie a rest given his age, 33, ancient in footballing terms. Even back then, they've played Northampton, winning 21, and there's a list of the teams, names like Wright, Edgehill, Horlock for City and then Bartram and Claridge for Northampton. Bit of a nostalgia trip seeing those names. Plus, game results like beating Gillingham 21, Burnley away 20, and Reading 31. League table shows City still down in 15th in Division 2. Moving on to January, and things are looking up. Dowie's scoring, and they've even had a good away win against Fulham. 4 wins on the bounce now, and they're clambering up the mid-table. Still in 15th though in that league table. Then it's on to the boring but essential stuff: finances. Gotta keep an eye on ticket prices and all that to bring in the cash. Gate receipts, sponsorships, player bonuses, all part of running a club. There's a sponsor called CAZAREZ, sounds a bit dodgy, a taste of Mexico, probably some cheap tequila knockoff. Upgrading facilities costs a bomb. £250,000 for something that takes 6 months. Apparently sponsors and facilities are key to avoid getting fined by the FA, wouldn't want that. And finally, a top scorer list to help with scouting. Looks like Dowie's doing alright for them, and Jamie Pollock too, surprisingly, for a midfielder. Top scorer in the league is some bloke called Malkin from Blackpool, 13 goals. Game results for January include losing to Bristol Rovers 21, beating Wycombe away 21, and wins against Stoke and York City, both 21 again. So yeah, typical footy management game stuff, battling through the leagues, trying to keep the fans and the board happy, signing players, and not going bankrupt. Pretty standard fare for the time, wasn't it? Good memories, mind. This page in N64 Magazine from August 99 is having a look at Premier Manager 64. It's a February update in the game, and things aren't going too badly for the reviewer, sitting respectably mid-table with Manchester City in Division 2. They've had a good run of wins, which is always nice in a management game, but, typical football board, after 3 bad results they're already getting twitchy and sending passive-aggressive memos. Then, a bit later in February, after a few more losses, bam, you're sacked. Football management, eh? Always cutthroat. They blame it on poor results and the manager, Dowie's, players, missing easy goals. Sounds familiar to any footy fan. There's a bit called Basmania talking about match highlights, saying they might be a bit basic, but at least you get Barry Davies commentary, which is always a treat, even if it gets a bit repetitive. Apparently, they tried to make the commentary system clever, but it still repeats itself, which is a bit of a chuckle. Then there's a section on visuals, complaining that the match highlights in this N64 version aren't as good as the PlayStation one, saying they've taken out the Sky Sports style replay features showing the path of the ball. They reckon it's because they've used an updated engine from Actua Soccer 3, but somehow it's worse visually. They moan about not being able to tell who's got the ball in possession, and that they've even taken out details like who scored the goals in the highlights. Bit of a downer on the visuals then, but they do say it's better than just a screen of stats, even if the highlights have some annoyances. Yeah, sounds like a typical compromise for the N64 back then. Wasn't always the best for the footy games, bless it. This page in N64 Magazine looks like a review for Premier Manager 64. Ah, Premier Manager. Remember those? It's got the classic pluses and minuses breakdown, you know the drill. Pluses are things like a decent database of clubs, loads of tactics, and superb realism. Bit of a stretch maybe even back then, eh? Oh, and Barry Davies commentary, which they say is diverse but repetitive. Can't have it all, apparently. On the minus side, wealth of missing options, poor highlights, and overreactive chairman. Sounds about right for management games back then. They're comparing it to IS-SAG 98, saying it's not quite the same but still a good footy game, giving IS-SAG 98 a massive 92% back on the N64. Crikey, that was high praise. Visually they reckon it's got plenty of stats but disappointing highlights again. Seems fair enough. Sounds are fantastic but repetitive commentary. Mastery point is a bit of a dig at Actua Soccer, hoping this runs faster. And lifespan, conceivably forever. Well, maybe back then it felt like that. The verdict box is pretty blunt. By buying PM64 you won't be buying into perfection, far from it. But what you will be guaranteeing long evenings of relegation dogfights. Ouch. But realistic probably. They say it's an enthralling slice of dugout action despite shocking exclusions, and gives it 82%. Not bad actually for a footy management sim on the N64. They mention playing as Leeds and getting thumped 62 at the Dell, which is wonderfully specific and relatable to the time. And tactics are apparently deep, Christmas trees and all that. Ultimately they conclude if you want to learn the lower league ropes, PM64 is your best bet on the N64. Fair enough. There weren't exactly loads of choices, were there? Good bit of nostalgia there for anyone who wasted hours on footy management games in the late 90s. This page is a review of Shadowgate 64 from back in issue 31 of N64 Magazine. Must have been 99 then. Right at the top, it says previously in N64, so they're catching us up on stuff from a previous issue, probably about Shadowgate 2. The main headline screams, Shadowgate 64, and verily Shadowgate didst return, dies, which is a bit dramatic, even for a review. The reviewer, Jess Bickham, doesn't sound too impressed to be honest. He's going on about how slow it is, calling it simply very dull, and saying it's like trudging through grey and brown corridors. Sounds about right for some of these old RPGs, eh? There's little snippets with pictures, like books, obviously, showing a bookshelf, and you can't take the slipper. Some unseen force holds it to the table. Classic adventure game logic, that. Another one says tables, with nothing on them. Real riveting stuff, clearly. Ah? They've got a pluses and minuses section, a bit like those checklists, saying the good points are a mildly intriguing story, and feeling trapped in a castle alone, which yeah, I suppose is the vibe they were going for. The bad points are slow as you like, baffling puzzles, like Zelda Never Happened, and not much fun. Ouch. Like Zelda Never Happened is a bit harsh, but I get his point. And not much fun is pretty damning. Then there's a bit called If You Like This, and they recommend Castlevania on the N64, saying it's castle set vampire bashing, vamp-filled fun. Now Castlevania, that was alright, a bit more action-packed than this Shadowgate sounds. They've broken it down into visuals, sounds, mastery and lifespan sections, giving them little numbers out of 5. Visuals gets 4, sounds gets 3 for footsteps and door creaking, mastery gets 5, saying it's quite a lot to it, but it's hardly innovative SNES style in fact. And lifespan also gets 5, saying nostalgia fans might stick with it, but others will get bored fast. Caller. Remarkably similar to the decade-old NES games, Shadowgate 64 is a game lost in time. Too little, far too late. And then a big score of 43%. Not great, is it? Seems like they weren't too keen. Oh, and there's an info burst bit with all the techie details. 64 meg cart, 1 player, needs 30 pages on the controller pack, cartridge save is a no-go, password save is also a no-go, no expansion pack, rumble pack or GB pack out now, and cost £40. 40 quid for a 43% game. Madness. And right at the bottom is Twisted Logic, which is about a puzzle with statues, primitive man, modern man, fairy, and elf. Sounds like one of those adventure game puzzles that make absolutely no sense when you think about it. Which begs just one question. Why? Exactly, mate. Why indeed? This page, right then, it's a kicking of Superman for the N64. Remember that one? Crikey, what a mess. They've gone with a headline, a bit like Cooperman but not as good, which is already laying it on thick. Cooperman, eh? Brings back memories of cheaper comics, that. Anyway, the review gets straight to the point, saying it was top of their import chart but sadly a disaster. They warn you off buying it, calling it astonishing crapness, and comparing parts to a naff version of Pilot Wings with rings and some awful minigames, like running over pedestrians with cars. Charming. Looking at the screenshots, the captions are just savage. Highly intelligent robots these. No, not really, on some blocky fellas, and visually, not too bad, but otherwise, completely useless, next to a very yellow corridor. There's even a bit about the 4-player deathmatch being absolutely pathetic, and Dark Shadows getting a lucky shot being pretty unusual. Ouch. In the info box, it's from Titus. 64 megabit cartridge, 1 to 4 players, needs a controller pack to save, passwords but no rumble or expansion pack support, coming out in July at a cost of 40 quid. 40 quid. In '99 that was a lot of pocket money for something this bad sounding. Pluses and minuses section is brutal. The only plus is Lex Luthor's fantastic laugh. The minuses list is a proper roasting. Dire controls, unplayably bad, tedious levels, masses of fog, and stunningly basic artificial intelligence. Doesn't sound like a barrel of laughs, does it? Then there's a If You Like This bit, comparing it to Mortal Kombat Mythologies GT, saying it's similarly awful but strangely amusing. They mention their N64 11th's import review gave Mythologies 9%, and reckons Superman is sub 15% material. Crikey. Breaking it down further, visuals are apparently acceptable environments ruined by fogging. Sounds are from the animated series and not too bad. Mastery is described as staggeringly inept, and lifespan is just, can you bear it? Hard-hitting stuff. The verdict is just taking the mick, calling it an utterly hopeless, consistently appalling leper of a game, bordering on the illegal, and then slapped with a 14% score. 14%! That's properly in the bin territory. Below that, 4 reasons to hate Superman, with daft quotes like, "Help Superman! Lex has kidnapped us!" and "Morning Dark Shadow," and "Solve my maze." Sounds like utter nonsense. And "There's someone in trouble in Metropolis." All delivered with a right lack of conviction from the sounds of it. Yes, Superman on the N64. Definitely one to avoid then. Tim Weaver gave it a right kicking. August 99 issue, page 77, if you're really interested in reliving the pain. Blimey, some games were truly awful back then, weren't they? This page from issue 31, right, it's got a big splash for Mario Golf 64 in the import arena section. Seems like they were quite chuffed with it, calling it one of the best sports games around, which is a bold claim for a golf game, innit? They were expecting maybe another Mario Kart, but were pleasantly surprised it wasn't just some naff golf sim with Mario characters pasted on. They mention the controls are simple, which is always a plus, and go on about various game modes like stroke play, match play, even skins, and some oddball ones involving slot machines and ring shots. Apparently, you can even play tournaments and driving ranges and all that. The reviewer's going on about the variety of characters. You've got the usual suspects: Mario, Bowser, Donkey Kong, and even Baby Mario from Yoshi's Island. Bit random that. And then some ordinary person characters who sound a bit dull compared to the usual Nintendo lot. They reckon it's better than Smash Bros in terms of classic Nintendo characters. Which is a fair point, I suppose. It's an import game from Japan and America, as they say at the top, so not out in the UK yet, hence the import arena bit. Looks like it cost about 35 quid if you imported it then, which was a fair bit of wedge back then for a punt on something you couldn't just pop to Electronics Boutique for. Anyway, sounds like they reckon it's a good un, might be worth keeping an eye out for when it finally hits Blighty. This page is a look at Mario Golf 64, and it's featured in a section called 6 of the Best, showing off various gameplay bits. They've got sections called Super Shot, Taunts, Nice On, Crazy Golf, Time Attack, and Ring Shot. It seems to be highlighting different fun things you can do in the game, like special moves, winding up your mates, trick shots, and different game modes. The screenshots show off the polygonal graphics, which were pretty snazzy at the time, with Mario and the gang on the green. Then there's a proper review section, giving it a whopping 90%. They're calling it top class and saying it's better than other golf games, even mentioning Hot Shots Golf on the PlayStation, which was a big rival back then. They reckon it looks great with silky Mario 64 course graphics, and that it'll win over golf game haters. They break it down into pluses and minuses, with pluses being simple controls, smooth graphics, plenty of speech, and good characters. Minuses are that it's tricky to beat, and a bit like Hot Shots Golf, which seems a bit of a weird minus point to me, considering how popular Hot Shots was. They also mention accessibility, saying it's easy to pick up, but some of the extras might be lost on you if you don't speak Japanese, suggesting waiting for the US version. The review scores each section too: 8 for visuals, 9 for sounds, 8 for mastery, and 9 for lifespan. Sounds like they really rated it, saying it's gonna last and is a top quality game, even if it is just golf. Good score, 90%, can't argue with that. This page in N64 Mag from back in the day is having a look at a Bugs Life game for the N64. Remember that film? They're saying they previewed it way back in issue 26, seems like a while ago now. The main article is titled, "Take My Bugs Life Please," which already sounds like they weren't exactly blown away. They're talking about a level where you float about on a dandelion using thermals, which they call actually holes in the ground that spew hot air, very descriptive, to get about. Sounds a bit Pilot Wingsy, they reckon. There's a bit about pelting enemies with berries, which sounds alright for kids I suppose, and a wasp attack which they call a rare moment of excitement. Not exactly raving about it, are they? They mention a boss fight against Hopper, the grasshopper from the film. Gia. They're not holding back on the criticism, saying it's a dull 3D platformer, and not as good as Space Circus, let alone classics like Banjo-Kazooie or Super Mario 64. Ouch. They even say, God forbid Super Mario 64, which is pretty strong stuff for a kid's game review. They do concede it's aimed at younger players, but still. There's a little pluses and minuses bit, saying the good points are it's based on a good film and a 3-year-old might like it. The negatives are it's extremely simple, nasty camera action, and appalling pop-up, which was always a killer back then, wasn't it? Pop-up was the bane of many N64 games. If you liked this sort of thing, they recommend Banjo-Kazooie, calling it colourful and sprawling, and second only to Super Mario 64, which is high praise indeed. Info Burst Box gives the usual details. Activision are the publishers. 64 megabit cart, 1 player, uses 12 pages on the controller pack. It was out in the US then, September in the UK, and Japan was TBA. Cost about £35, which was a fair chunk of pocket money back then. They rate visuals a 5, sounds a 6, mastery a 5, and lifespan only a 4, which doesn't sound promising. The verdict? Bashed out cash-in of a great film that fails to make any impact whatsoever. And a score of 40%. Blimey, they really didn't like it. J.E.S. Bickham is the reviewer, remember him? Seems like they thought it was a bit of a stinker. Really just a quick movie time job. Probably right, to be honest, movie games weren't always the best back then, were they? This page is a review of Fighting Force on the N64, and blimey, it doesn't sound like a belter, does it? Core, who are known for Tomb Raider on the PlayStation, have had a go at a beat MUP on the N64, and the reviewer here is not impressed, giving it a measly 26%. They reckon it's a bit of a PlayStation game squashed into an N64 cartridge, and not in a good way. Apparently the camera is rubbish and the controls are a bit clunky, you even have to press Z to run. How daft is that? There's a section about 4 characters, poor characters, and it describes the playable lot. Smasher, who's big and slow, Spook, who's quick, Alan, who's weak, and Hawk and Mace, who are somewhere in the middle. Sounds like your typical beat MUP lineup, but apparently nothing special. Eek. They've got these little boxes rating it out of 5 for visuals, sounds, mastery and lifespan, and they're all pretty low. Visuals are just perfectly acceptable but completely undistinguished. Sounds are just whack and thud, and mastery is basically, it's a rubbish PlayStation game. Lifespan is a 3 out of 5, but only because it's so repetitive you won't want to play it for long anyway. In a little, if you like this, box, they suggest Fighter's Destiny as a better game, even though it's not exactly the same, but they call it a first-rate scrapper, which sounds like faint praise at best. The pluses and minuses section is quite sarcastic too. Plus point? It's an N64 game. Minus point? But one that you'll never want to play. Ouch. They've really gone to town on this one, haven't they? Looks like Fighting Force is one to avoid then. This page from Club 64 looks like it's bang in the middle of the mag. Right then, what have we got here? Looks like the main feature this month is Star Wars Episode 1, Racer. Yeah, that pod racing game. They are calling it this month's top guide, and promising to clock up the fastest times with a guide to the first 14 tracks, which sounds decent enough if you were stuck on a few of them. I remember that game being a bit of a looker at the time, even if the film itself was. Well, you know, there are some screenshots, looks like the snowy track and the desert one, showing off the speed. They always did like to show the speed, didn't they? Down the side here, we've got the usual sections. Mailbox, probably someone moaning about something. Action replay for cheat codes. Essential back then. Tips extra for more game tips. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, always a bit of a weird one, claiming to cure your gaming headaches, whatever that meant. Nintendo Hotline, in case you got really stuck. Imagine calling a phone line for game help now, eh? Game On, sounds like challenges. I'm the best bet, that's full of bragging letters, likely from kids. Then there's Contact for the Skill Club and Platinum Club, Directory for buying and selling games, and back issues and subscriptions if you missed an issue or wanted to get it delivered. August 1999, it says at the bottom, blimey, time flies. Yep, standard issue stuff for the time, really. This page of Club 64 mailbox, right? It's got all the usual reader letters and bits and bobs you'd expect. Kicking off with the star letter, someone's been messing about with cheats in GoldenEye, the usual invincible, infinite ammo lark, and they've managed to glitch it out proper. They're seeing invisible soldiers and two-faced characters, all sorts. Sounds about right for GoldenEye on the 64, you could always get it to do weird stuff if you tried hard enough. Hivul. Then there's a letter called Saddam, which is a bit dramatic, isn't it? Apparently ex-editor James Ashton is plotting against Tim because of some Weaver family takeover business. Bit over the top, but these magazines did love a bit of in-house drama. There's a picture of a sign for Weaver's picture framing, and the editor, Ed, is having none of it, saying James won't be going anywhere fast from Dartmoor. Cheeky. Down in the correction corner they're sorting out a few mistakes. Someone got their Ponyta and Rapidash mixed up in the Pokemon Snap bit from last issue, a basic error apparently. Then there's some nonsense about Ted Ninto being an anagram of Nintendo from a Duke Nukem. 0 hour review wrong again. They messed up a Rampage score, giving it 22% instead of 82%. A big difference, as they say. And lastly, the map arrows were pointing the wrong way in the special investigations section. You know, typical magazine stuff, always getting something wrong. Worried. Lastly, there's a letter called My Sister. This person sent in some snaps of their sister, dressed up as Link from Zelda, meeting Malin. They're on about spotting gold sculptures and collecting tokens. Ocarina of Time was massive back then, everyone was banging on about it. Kids dressing up as Link. Not surprised, really. This page from the magazine, we're in the mailbox section, right? Always a bit of a laugh to see what people were winging about back then. First up, Matthew from Leicestershire is asking about the Ultra Release list, and why some games mentioned have never been seen. Ed, bless him, explains that they only list games that were actually confirmed for the N64, mentioning Spooky as an example. Seems like a bit of a clear-up job there. Warrant, then Bo from Norfolk, is moaning about finding it hard to use the N64 controller with one hand after an arm injury, and wonders if that Ultra Racer one-handed controller thing is any good. Ed mentions it's supposed to be for single-handed play, but actually needs two hands to work properly, and costs a fair bit, around 25 to 30 quid, but suggests just sticking with the normal pad and reconfiguring it. There's a little picture of this Ultra Racer pad, looks a bit clunky doesn't it? And some kind of spaceship picture in this section, must be related to the one-handed gaming point. Worry. Next, Stephen from Hamilton is questioning something from issue 23 about Nintendo having exclusive rights to Star Wars games. Ed clarifies that Nintendo only had exclusive rights for 6 months for Racer, not the Phantom Menace adventure game which was on PC and PlayStation, and reckons N64 owners are probably better off not getting the adventure game anyway, calling it rubbish. Bit harsh, Ed. Lastly in the mailbox, someone's bored about more Triforce rumors in Zelda 64, but they reckon they found something on the official Nintendo of America website. There's a little Triforce image there too, of course. Everyone was obsessed with that back then. Down below we've got Dream On. Someone called Alistair from Australia has sent in some ideas for GoldenEye 007 extra missions, calling it GoldenEye 007, the extra missions. Sounds like a kid's idea really, but quite elaborate actually. 5 missions, involving saving Felix, destroying a nuclear tanker, going to Stromberg's underwater city Jaws and Stromberg both making an appearance, apparently Spectre HQ in Africa, and even infiltrating Rare disguised as Donkey Kong to steal their future N64 and Dolphin plans. Bonkers? In it, new weapons too, Platinum PP7 and Gold and Phosphorus flare gun. They reckon the size of the levels would be about 4 times GoldenEye size, and split into 4 quarters. Madness but kind of fun to read. Canam. Shaken Never Stirred is more of the same GoldenEye mission ideas, mentioning Clob Spider, Pen Grenade, and Scatter Mines, and that each mission would be almost 4 times the size of the GoldenEye ones, split into quarters. Right, well that's enough GoldenEye dreaming for one page, always with the GoldenEye. This page of N64 Magazine has a section called Bonus Letters, where readers write in. Someone called M. Hughes from Widnes is complaining that nobody supports Ipswich, and Ed, the editor, replies with a classic bit of British humour. There's a funny letter about Belgian number 15s being called Beffen, which Ed finds hilarious. Andrew Harvey from Reading is commenting on Link's massive mutton chops, which is a bit of a laugh about Zelda. Someone else, Sverre Andreas Sidnis Gustaven from Norway, asks who has houses, mountains and hills, and Ed guesses Julie Andrews, which is a reference to The Sound of Music. Quite funny. There's also a letter from Oliver Rea, who thinks they won't print his letter because he's scared of saying the word tra. Not sure what that's about, but Ed just says, yep, you were right. Niall Matthews from Ireland saved a small fortune, and Ed just asks, how small? Tineke Endicott from Plymouth says her kids are gentle and still play on bikes, and Ed quips, so, they don't go hunting in the woods then? Mattijaes Wouter Franken from the Netherlands says, great distance my foot, and Ed replies, not that big surely. Sam Holland from Cardiff won't break for Mark Green, and Ed jokes, his feet will crush you. Dan Morris from Redditch says something is as useful as a glass baseball bat, to which Ed replies, so, not too useful then. And finally Sam Toozum from Liverpool jokes about being the Incredible Hulk, and Ed says, if only. It's all a bit of light-hearted banter really. Then there's a section called So Tell Me This, where they answer some reader questions. Andy Stratham from Oxford is asking about GTA 64 having a 4-player mode and how much action replay carts cost. They say 4-player for GTA 64 isn't confirmed but sounds exciting, and action replay carts are pricey, between £40 £50, which was a fair bit back then. They're also asked about Capcom doing Resident Evil, and if there's a chance of Street Fighter 64, and they reckon Resident Evil from Capcom is doubtful, but you never know about Street Fighter 64. Mark Story from Sheffield asks about Smash Bros and if Rare are doing a Tekken beta like Killer Instinct 3D. They say Smash Bros is like Super Mario RPG, whatever that means, and that Rare did confirm Killer Instinct 3D was in development ages ago, but there's been no news since. Matthew Kvasnik from Stockport asks about Command & Conquer and Half-Life 64. They say the chance of Command & Conquer is the same as always, which is 0 basically, and Half-Life 64 isn't brilliant, but you never know. Finally, Ken Lau from Beverley asks about other new football games apart from Premier Manager, and which ones will let you play in the Champions League, UEFA Cup and FA Cup. They mention Actua Soccer 64 as definite and including unlicensed versions of competitions, and FIFA 2000 coming later in the year, and Michael Owen's Soccer 99 coming next month as the best football game this year. So, a mixed bag of questions and answers. Typical magazine stuff really. Oh, and they're explaining cartridge sizes, with Zelda being 256 megabits, and Mario 64 only 64 megabits. Zelda was massive back then, 4 times the size of Mario 64, mental. And the expansion pack adds 4 megabytes of space, which is half the size of the original Mario cartridge. They're trying to explain it all, but it's a bit techie for a casual read. This page of the N64 magazine, dubbed the N64 board, is showcasing reader submissions, a proper bit of community spirit in it. Right at the top, someone's asking about Perfect Dark versus GoldenEye, wondering if it's really that different. Bit daft really. Anyone who played them knows Perfect Dark was the evolution, but fair enough if you were hyped for it back then. They reckon the new levels and central star bit might make it different, bless them. Then there's a fella who sprayed his N64 console gold. Says he used masking tape and all that, proper DIY job. Tim Plunkett from Wembley, taking console modding seriously it seems. Someone else is on about finishing Super Mario 64 in 340, which I assume is days. Ross Galloway from Scotland reckons it's impressive. Fair play, Mario 64 was a massive game at the time. Getting every star felt like a proper achievement. Warrentrios. The rest of the page is reader artwork. Tom Cousins from Chichester drew portraits of the magazine team. Jess and Paul get a mention as the hair pair. Bit cheeky. Juha-Pekka Sari from Finland sent in a Donkey Kong snowboarding picture. Tom Thompson from Leeds drew a scared-looking Mario, and Andrew Humphreys from Cornwall did a Duke Nukem piece. Classic Duke with his shades and muscles. Andrea Ball is the Tomb Raider artist according to Shamoon Hussain from Yorkshire, and Mark Cook from Oxford drew a nice Link from Zelda. So yeah, a real mixed bag of fan art, all the usual suspects for the N64 era really. Good stuff for a reader's page, shows they were engaging with the readers back then. This page in N64 magazine, right, it's the Right You Are section, where readers get to have their say. Always a bit of fun to see what folks were thinking back then. It's basically a letters page for game reviews. Dorchu. First up we've got F1 WGP, and Peter Horner from Workshop is laying into it. He reckons it's rubbish, especially compared to the PlayStation F1 game from '98. Says the cars are like cardboard boxes, and the graphics are dull. Bit harsh maybe? He's given it a pretty low score of 56%, so he's clearly not a fan. Always a bit of a Marmite game, those F1 titles back in the day. Beret. Then there's Mario Party, which is getting a much warmer reception. Bevis McNeil from Leeds thinks it's brilliant multiplayer fun, even better than GoldenEye for that sort of thing. He slapped a 95% on it, which is top marks really. Mario Party was always a laugh with mates, causing arguments and all that classic N64 stuff. Runo. Next up is Castlevania, and Tom Harding from Gloucester is loving it. He can't understand anyone complaining, reckons the graphics are great, sounds excellent, and the plot's good too. He mentions giant skeletons, and Dracula himself sounds about right for Castlevania. He's gone for a 92%, so another high score there. Castlevania 64, it was alright, wasn't Symphony of the Night on the PlayStation, but still, decent enough for the time. Lastly, there's Beetle Adventure Racing, and Greg Cossar from Scotland is well impressed, giving it 95% as well. He says it deserved better than 81% originally, and thinks it's even better than Mario Kart and F-Zero X. Bit of a bold claim that, but he's clearly enjoying the shortcuts and multiplayer. Beetle Racing, yeah, it was a bit of a sleeper hit, surprisingly good fun with those transforming cars and all. Ease? At the bottom, it tells you how to send in your reviews. Right you are. N64 Magazine, 30 Monmouth Street, Bath, BA12BW, and an email address, if you were feeling modern back then. This page in N64 Mag, right, it's all about how to get good at that Star Wars Episode 1 racer game. Remember that one? It's got a big title splash saying How T2. Burn it up Sebulba style in Star W. Episode 1. Episode 1, Racer. Sebulba, what a cheat that guy was. They're saying it's like Wipeout 64 meets F-Zero X, which is a fair shout actually. You had that floaty feel with the speed. Apparently they really liked it when they reviewed it last month and gave it a solid 88%. Not bad at all. There's a bit called What We Said, where they've stuck in their review box, and it says, the Star Wars name alone will sell millions of copies of this game. Thankfully it's actually worth all the hype. Bit strong on the hype there lads, but yeah, it was decent. Yay. Then there's a How T2. Manage your money successfully bit, and 7 experienced pod racers tips. It's all about spending your winnings wisely at Watto Shop to upgrade your pod racer. Tip number 1 is about experienced players, suggesting you should set the prize money to winner takes all, practice the tracks, and restart if you're not winning to build up trugnuts quickly. They say by the time you unlock Bullseye Navia you'll have loads of trugnuts. Good tip actually, Bullseye was pretty quick. They also recommend getting 2 pit droids to keep on top of your upgrades. Warrington Orchestra. There's a screenshot showing the game in action, with the on-screen display, lap times, and a little tip box at the bottom saying to pick either winner takes all, skilled or fair, as your preferred difficulty level. Yeah, good shout actually, get the difficulty right and you're set. Overall, it's a decent page of tips for Racer. Remember spending hours on that, trying to beat my mate's lap times. Good times. This page is all about Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. Remember that one? They're calling it Burn It Up Sebulba style in Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. Bit much that. Daniel Glenfield's written this piece, giving us some tips. 1 Racer. Tip number 1 is about upgrades, telling us to be careful with your cash. Apparently if you're a bit green at races, you might be tempted to just buy any old upgrade, but they reckon if you regret it you can trade in your old parts at Watto's shop for some cash back, which is handy I suppose, so you can get a better engine later. Make your podracer faster than ever, they say. Bit obvious, innit? Traitor. Then there's the astute saver, basically saying don't blow all your money at once, keep some back for when you really need it, especially on harder tracks. Makes sense, doesn't it? Once. Next up is pit droids. Apparently for a grander pop these trugnut droids will fix your damaged bits. Good if you've been buying dodgy parts from Watto's junkyard, they joke. 3 droids are plenty for maintenance apparently, not exactly C-3PO or R2-D2 but still loyal. Cute. Tip number 5 is about time trials. They are saying don't even bother with time trials until you've got loads of money to upgrade your racer, as it's usually the tight-fisted players with the fastest machines who win. Fair enough. And gang. There are a few screenshots dotted about from Racer showing the gameplay, you know, flying through canyons and that. Looks alright I suppose for a Star Wars tie-in back then. They've got little captions like, the joys of the open road and should have laid off the radioactive burgers last night. Classic N64 Mag humour. All in all, just some basic tips for Racer, probably useful for kids who were getting it for Christmas that year. This page showcases tips for Star Wars Episode 1 Racer on the N64. Remember that one? Podracing was all the rage back then, after the Phantom Menace film came out. It's got guides for 4 of the tracks, aimed at getting you around them quicker. Rouge. First up is the Boonta training course, which they rightly say is the easiest. It's just basic stuff. Boosting, navigating corners, and dodging rocks. Pretty obvious stuff really, if you've played it. Gotcha. Then there's the Mongaza Speedway, a Neon City track. They say it's short and fast and good for practicing skidding. Skidding, eh? Sounds like they were still figuring out the handling, which was a bit twitchy if you remember. Kidding, eh? Next is Bedo's Wild Ride, the ice level. This one was a bit more interesting. They talk about multiple paths and finding shortcuts, using the statue and tents. Getting through that statue felt like a proper discovery at the time if you managed it. Lastly, Aquilaris Classic, the underwater level. They mention the tunnels and relaxing the accelerator for tighter turns. Remember seeing the fish? Mind-blowing graphics for the time, even if it did get a bit blurry underwater. There's also a bit about turbo boost starts, pressing up on the analog stick just before the 1, a classic trick. And repairing, something you had to do mid-race if you crashed too much. Hold R to fix your engines, but obviously slows you down. They recommend Anakin Skywalker or Bullseye Navia as characters to use, which is fair enough for beginners. Overall it's a typical tips page from back then, nothing earth-shattering, but probably useful if you were struggling with those lap times back in '99. Probably helped a few of us get a bit quicker and show off to our mates. This page from Club 64, How to Burn It Up Sebulba style in Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, is all about getting better at the pod racing game on the N64. It's giving us tips for 3 tracks: Malastar 100, Vengeance, and Spice Mine Run. For Malastar 100, they're saying it looks easy, but the turns are tricky, especially that big jump in the middle. Tip number 1 is to hold Z, which is Zai, for a short skid to save time at the first corner, and then boost across the water. They also mention boosting in bursts on the straights, but being careful on the corners, and sticking to the left on one of the next turns to avoid a crash. Finally, for a large gap, they suggest boosting just before, and pulling back on the stick to avoid falling short, which is a classic trick in these types of races. Vengeance is described as the first zero-gravity tunnel track, which caused plenty of crashes back in the day, didn't it? The first tip is about the rotating door, which they say looks intimidating, but is just about going through the middle. Then, they mention a large structure behind the door being the real danger, and to steer right to avoid it. For the wind tunnel section, they advise staying in the middle but sticking to the sides to avoid the blades of the fans. Sounds a bit hairy. They also say to boost before the Zerog tunnel and dodge boulders, and finally to hug a long bend to cut down lap times. Zerog in a racer on the N64, you can't say it wasn't ambitious. DKK. Spice Mine Run is set on Mongaza and is all about dodging industrial machinery. First tip is to stick to the right and nip down a hidden tunnel for a shortcut, which might not even show on the map. Sneaky. Then, when the track splits in 3, boost right but stay to the far side to avoid a rock. They also mention keeping right in the tunnels to avoid those anti-gravity transports, and finally shaving milliseconds off your time by sticking inside when you go through a fiery cage section. Rounding it off, they suggest boosting all the way to the finish once you're round the bend. Spice Mine Run, always a bit of a chaotic one with all that mining stuff going on. Warrington Nolsa, there's also a bit about narrow gaps, saying to approach them head-on, and if you're coming in at an angle, try using the C buttons to tilt your craft, which could be a bit fiddly at 600 miles per hour. And jumps, well, they're saying jumps are for catching up or getting ahead, pull back on the stick to stay in the air longer for canyons and pits, and push forward to descend faster for extra speed. Good old jumps, always a chance to get some air on Howler Gorge if you boosted beforehand. Good tips all round for getting a bit faster in Racer. This page of Club 64 is all about getting ahead in your racing games, mainly Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, which was all the rage back then. They've got a cheat to unlock extra characters, basically saying if you win races you unlock more vehicles and their drivers, and you can upgrade them too. Then there's a tip for getting psyched up, which is a bit of a laugh. Apparently if you hold Z and press A at the main menu in tournament mode, you get some friendly banter before a race, whatever that means, probably just some characters mouthing off at each other. They also have a proper cheat for Jin Riso. Sounds like a character they couldn't normally figure out how to unlock. You have to go through some faff with save files and button presses, spelling out RRJINNRE, very cryptic. If you do it right, apparently OK pops up and you get Jin Riso, unless you've already got Mars Guo, in which case, tough luck I guess. Then it's on to proper track tips for Racer. They've got 3 courses covered: Sunken City, Howler Gorge, and Doug Derby. For Sunken City, they're telling you to stick to the right at the start, go through a narrow tunnel, and look out for a sneaky little shortcut. Apparently there's a small path that's a bit tricky, but saves time, and then later on you need to spot an orange sign to find a ramp. They reckon boosting round a bend with crowds is a good idea too. Howler Gorge tips are next. Smash through a statue at the start, sounds a bit destructive, and then stay right through an icy bit, and over a wooden bridge. Later on, they say there's a very narrow stretch where you need to be careful, and near the end of the lap, you'll have to weave through rocks and boulders. After the first lap, a tent opens up to reveal a shortcut tunnel, handy to know I suppose. Gaige. Finally Doug Derby, which they say is dangerous. They tell you to use Z to skid around the first corner, always good to know the controls, and then boost through a low tunnel. Hug the bends tightly apparently to stay ahead, and don't settle for less than first place. Bit demanding, aren't they? Each track has lap records listed, showing you what the magazine guys managed to do, probably after hours of playing. Good effort, chaps. This page is all about getting better at Star Wars Episode 1, Racer on the N64. Feels like a blast from the past, doesn't it? They've got tips for 4 different tracks: Scrapper's Run, Zuga Challenge, Baru Coast, and Bumpy's Breakers. For Scrapper's Run, they're saying to boost at the start, obviously, and to use boosters carefully in the tunnel bit, and then you can apparently get away with boosting through some twists later on. Zuga Challenge is all about not boosting too much early on because of tight corners, and staying left to avoid some crane, and then using a small gap to get through quicker. Baru Coast sounds a bit sneaky, mentioning a shortcut if your engine's up to scratch. They talk about volcanic eruptions, which sounds dramatic, and avoiding trees and vines. Bumpy's Breakers is all about underwater tunnels, and apparently there are ramps that can throw you into walls. Lovely. They suggest braking for the 3rd ramp, which is probably good advice. Then there's a bit about dual control mode, using 2 controllers, which was always a bit of a faff, wasn't it? And cheat codes. Invincibility can be had by entering RRJABBA, and they also mention a mirror mode by coming first in every race, for those who want a real challenge, or just to mess around. Oh, and to get Sebulba's Padracer, you just win the last race, and double tap R, simple as that. Warrington Nook. Lastly, next month is teasing part 2 of the guide, and more tips for N64 30 seconds, whatever that will be. Looks like they're keeping us on our toes for the next issue, back in '99. This page in N64 Magazine, right? It's all about hacking your games with an action replay, remember those? The headline's a bit dramatic. Hacks entertainment, mess around with your games in ways you never thought possible. Bit much really, but basically, it's talking about using this action replay cartridge to cheat in your N64 games and mess about with the code. Dorite. There's a picture of the action replay cartridge itself, looks pretty standard, and then there's Mario in his cart looking a bit mischievous. The article, by a Martin Kitts, reckons hacking conjures up images of secret government stuff, but actually, anyone can have a go, apparently. They're saying even you could give yourself infinite energy in Zelda, get the Ice Key in Banjo-Kazooie, or access hidden bits in GoldenEye. Sounds tempting, doesn't it? Though getting World War III going, probably a bit of an exaggeration. The article then goes into a specific example. the feather hop in Mario Kart. Apparently back in the days of the SNES Mario Kart, there was a feather power-up, but they dropped it for the N64 version. Worried players would just drive through walls and ruin everything. But, using the action replay, you can get it back. They give you step-by-step instructions on how to use the code generator to find the right code, and it sounds like a bit of trial and error. You have to find certain values, add to them, and then enter this long code. If you get it right, apparently you'll be able to drive off before the lights even go green, and your kart will jump really high. A bit of a laugh, I suppose, if you're into that kind of thing. They even give thanks to a few people like Scott Cockcroft and Al Pierce for figuring this stuff out. Dedicated lot, these hackers. This page is from the tips section. In it, looks like we've got some cheat codes here for Rampage 2 and Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. Remember Rampage? Smashing up buildings as giant monsters? Good bit of mindless fun that was. Apparently if you wanted to play as different monsters like the Alien, George, Lizzie, Mayukas or Ralph, you had to enter these daft passwords like B1G4L and SM14N and that sort of thing on the name entry screen. Or if you were feeling lazy you could just put in N0T3T and get all of them. Aki. Then there's Star Wars Racer. Everyone was buzzing about Episode 1 back then, even if Jar Jar Binks did make you cringe a bit. This game was actually alright, proper fast pod racing. Looks like there's a bunch of cheats here too, all starting with RR, like RR the Beast for mirror mode, RRDEBUG for a debug menu, RRDUAL for dual control, and RRJABBA for invincibility. Though even with invincibility it says you can still fall off cliffs and get blown up by turbo boost fires, which sounds a bit rubbish if you ask me. What's the point then? And finally, RRJINNRESO, to racers Jin Riso whoever he is. Oh, and a quick start tip, just press A when the number 1 disappears at the start of the race. Simple as that. Good times, eh? This page then is your classic tips spread from back in the day, isn't it? Right then, first up we've got passwords for Charlie Blast's Territory, that odd little puzzle game, remember that? Looks like they've got the level passwords laid out for you there from level 2 all the way to 18. If you were stuck, well there you go. Then there's Flying Dragon, the beat 'em up. They're on about unlocking characters by earning medals in the Ryumao tournament, and defeating Bokuchin and Ryumao. Apparently if you get all 10 medals you unlock platinum characters. They've even got tips for difficulty levels, tap left for very easy, and right for very hard. Groundbreaking stuff. Jakabe. And lastly, the golden oldie, GoldenEye. Of course, everyone wanted more characters in multiplayer back then. They're telling you how to unlock 31 extra characters. Blimey, 31! By holding all sorts of button combinations on the controller, L and R and top C and all that jazz. Looks like you could get Baron Samedi, Mayday, Aramov, and even Bond himself, amongst others. Good times. This page of the magazine is all about Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, which was a bit of a regular feature back then, sort of like a gaming agony aunt. People would write in with their game problems, and Dr. Kit's would try and sort them out. Then what's all about? First up we've got a reader stuck on Mischief Makers. It was a bit of a quirky platformer on the N64, asking about gold gems and a load of level numbers he's struggling with. Dr. Kit's has given some brief pointers for a few of the levels, like level 32 where you need to save someone in a Santa hat and shake him to get a gem, and level 310 which is a 100-meter dash in under 11 seconds. Sounds a bit tight for a gem if you ask me. Then there's a level 46 with a backward somersault move, and level 411 where you just need to hit the boss hard. There's a screenshot of Mischief Makers, looks like a boss fight with a lava level, typical platformer stuff, aquats. Next up, Liam from Leeds is having trouble with Body Harvest on the N64, remember that one? A bit of a weird one where you drove around in vehicles fighting aliens. Liam's stuck following a truck in the military base, but it never shows up. Dr. Kitts reckons Liam needs to hang around outside the base, as you're not allowed in until you've found the truck circling about first. Makes sense, those game logic puzzles could be a bit obscure sometimes. Quai. Finally, someone is stuck on Turok 2 level 6, trying to find the 5th ion capacitor. Turok 2 was a proper beast of a game. Lots of guns and dinosaurs. Dr. Kitts says the ion capacitor is above the lasers and fans after the moving platforms, and there's another one on a pipe in the room with narrow walkways. He mentions platforms on timers too, sounds like typical Turok platforming. Jump at the right time or you're toast. There's a screenshot of Turok 2 as well. Platforms floating over some deadly looking drops. So yeah, classic Dr. Kitts, trying to help us all get through those tricky bits in games. Back when if you were stuck you actually had to wait for the magazine to come out to get your answer. None of this internet walkthrough malarkey. Good times. This page of the magazine, well, it seems Hotline's been a bit sidetracked from the usual Zelda and Pokemon Stadium stuff, and gone all spooky with Castlevania. Apparently loads of us were getting stuck on this vampire game, so they've decided to give us a hand with the main bits we're struggling with. They've also been having a go on Star Wars Episode 1, Racer, and reckon N64 Magazine's guide is the best you can get, cheeky blighters. But fair enough, they're answering our specific questions for those of us who are pulling our hair out. They've made a bit of a joke about getting the garlic and wooden stakes ready, bit dramatic, innit? Right then, down to the questions. Someone stuck in the maze, keeps bumping into dogs and can't find Massaculus. The magazine's given a set of directions, sounds like a right faff to be honest, lots of lefts and rights and trees involved, to find this young scamp Massaculus. Then there's a question about these special crystals you find. Turns out they let you overwrite your save game, and unlock harder difficulties and different costumes. Bit of replayability then, I suppose. Lastly, someone's stuck in the castle centre, specifically with using the nitro and mandragora. The mag explains how to use the nitro to blow up a cracked wall, and then grab the white jewel and batter some lizard-like chaps. After that, it's down to the red carpet room with stairs, fight some vampires, grab mandragora, and head back to the cracked wall. Sounds like a right runaround to me. Still, helpful if you are stuck, I guess. This page from the magazine, right, it's all about the Nintendo hotline. Proper blast from the past this. Remember phoning these guys up when you were stuck in a game? 1999 this is, so you're probably wrestling with stuff on the N64. They've got a couple of questions here for their experts. First one's about the villa in the garden maze. Sounds a bit Resident Evil-ish, doesn't it, asking how to get on top of the fountain. Apparently, there's a bit of stone that rises at midnight, and you need to ride it up. But watch out, it goes down again at 1 AM. Very specific that you had to time things just right back then. Oh, then there's a question about Charlie, Vincent and Roses. Sounds a bit cryptic. The answer says you need to go find Rosa between 3 and 6 AM in the room with Roses after talking to Vincent. Looks like some vampire game going on. The screenshot of Vincent even says, "I am Charlie Vincent, the mightiest of all vampire killers." Cheesy but brilliant at the time. Apparently once you've done that you get the archives key. Easy peasy they say. Borrington Nook, they're bigging up their hotline here, saying they're expert games players, open 7 days a week, and you can call them for answers, cheats, all sorts. The number is 017-036-52222. Not premium rate, which is good of them. Opening hours are listed too. Weekdays 12 to 8 PM, weekends 10 AM to 6 PM. So if you were really stuck after school, you could give them a ring. And check this, they've got a new automated service now, for help even in the small hours. 24-hour help, automated lines costing 50p a minute. Number for that is 0891 669945. Make sure you've got permission from whoever pays the phone bill for that one, eh? They even tell you to get a pen and paper ready to jot things down. Proper old school. Good times. This page then is from an old N64 magazine. Looks like they're trying to give us some new ways to play our games. It's called 10 Challenges to Test the Best, cheeky sir. First up is Mario Kart 64. The challenge is called Donut Race on Big Donut. Basically they want you to play battle mode without weapons, just driving around collecting balloons clockwise, which sounds a bit daft really, but I suppose Big Donut was a pretty big map for battle mode, so maybe it makes it more interesting. They want you to do 5 circuits for the gold, 3 for silver, and just 1 for bronze, so not too taxing to begin with. Next is Glover, remember that one? Ball buoyancy, they've called it. It's all about getting the ball across water in the early levels, level 13 specifically. They want you to see how many jumps you can do, and land without falling in. Bit of a strange one. But Glover was a bit of a strange game to begin with, wasn't it? 7 jumps for gold, 5 for silver, and 3 for bronze. Bit of a stra. Then it's F-Zero X, Hand Horror, is the name for this one. On the Big Hand circuit, they want you to race in practice mode, backwards. Now that sounds properly difficult. Big Hand was a twisty track even going forwards, so going the wrong way will be a right mess. They want you to do 6 laps backwards for gold, 4 for silver, and 2 for bronze. Good luck with that one, you'd be crashing every 5 seconds. Lastly there's Body Harvest, driving test, jumping into the Milo's supplies van and weaving through some trees, within a time limit. Body Harvest, that was a bit of a weird and clunky game, but had its moments. 30 seconds for gold, 25 for silver, and 20 for bronze. Probably easier said than done with the driving in that game, to be fair. So there you go, 4 challenges to get you back into some of your old N64 games. Not bad ideas actually. Might dig out F-Zero X for that backwards race. Sounds like a laugh, if a frustrating one. This page from the magazine, right, it's got a section called Club 64, 10 Challenges to Test the Best. Looking at these mini challenges, they're setting up little tasks in various N64 games to try out. First up is GoldenEye. Naturally, it's always GoldenEye, isn't it? The challenge is called Shake the Room. They want you to go to the silo level on agent difficulty and just cause absolute mayhem, shooting up the scenery to make explosions, not even bothering with the objectives. They reckon the blast radius is pretty big, which, yeah, it always was. Scores range from 40, 30 and 20 points depending on how well you do this room-shaking business. Then there's Zelda, Ocarina of Time, tightrope treachery. It's all about that tightrope in Goron City. You have to pelt across it, backwards and forwards at full speed. You get a few seconds break to get your bearings, and braking is out. Circuits are scored at 6, 4 and 2. Sounds a bit fiddly that. Diddy Kong Racing gets a look in with Frogfest. You're in adventure mode, heading to the pond with the Froggy hangout, and then you've got 30 seconds to splat as many of these green blighters as possible. Copious use of the B button for swinging around is encouraged. They even mention the sickening squelching noise. Charming. Frog points are 10, 7 and 5. Mario Party is next. With Bowser's Revenge, it's the bash and cash subgame. You're Bowser and you have to bounce on the other players on trampolines for as long as you can within the time limit. They say you can steer yourself in mid-air to keep it going. Bounce scores are 30, 20 and 10. Mario Party, always good for a laugh, even if it did lead to controller rage now and then. Finally, Turok 2. Seeds of Evil get a shout with Raptoid Run. Head to level 1, kill the first Raptoid to get the level 2 key, then lure the next two back to the starting room without getting scratched. Sidestepping is your friend. Time in seconds is the score, with 30, 25, and 20 being the target times. Turok 2, bit dark and gory for some, but it had its moments. So yeah, just some daft little challenges to try out if you were bored. Back in the day. Seems like a bit of fun, I suppose, if you were stuck for something to do. This page right then, it's the contact page from issue 31, so we're looking at early 99, yeah must be. Seems like everyone's trying to swap games and consoles or flog their fanzines. In the fanzine bit, there's a call out for writers, must be desperate for content. Bloke called Dale Wassell is after old issues 1 to 5, and he's paying 20 quid, which wasn't bad then. Someone else wants tips and cheats, £1.50 for those, cheap as chips. And there's even someone after issue number 20 specifically. The games to swap section is quite lively. Quake, Lilac Wars, that's Star Fox 64 to you and me, Body Harvest, Turok 2, Micro Machines, Rogue Squadron, Forsaken, South Park, F-Zero X, all the usual suspects for swaps. Top Gear Overdrive is knocking about, and someone's trying to get rid of Diddy Kong Racing. Poor Diddy. There's a lot of chat about Wave Race 64, Mario Kart 64, GoldenEye, as you'd expect, still popular then. Loads of people wanting to trade for Zelda 64 and Mario games. Dorrington Dorcas. Games Wanted section, GoldenEye and WWF Warzone are top of the list for wanted games. NBA Courtside is mentioned, bit of a forgotten one that. Rogue Squadron wanted desperately by someone, clearly a Star Wars fan. And finishing off with pen pals. Always a bit odd seeing these. Kids wanting pen pals who like N64 and gaming. A 15-year-old lad looking for a female pen pal who likes footy and music. Good luck mate. And a Norwegian fella wanting pen pals from all over the world. Must be lonely in Norway. That's about the size of it really. Swaps, wants and lonely hearts for N64 gamers. The next page takes a humorous look at the storylines in N64 games, under the title, Losing the Plot. It starts by saying, have you ever really thought about the plots of N64 games? And they reckon they have. It's got this bloke called Mark Green, as the genial host, whoever he is, and he's basically saying that while Hollywood films are full of plot holes, N64 games are a different kettle of fish entirely, in a good way, because they're made by geniuses like Miyamoto. To illustrate the point, they use GoldenEye as an example, which fair enough, was a massive game back then. They've got a scene 4 inches mock-up, set in Arkhangelsk airfield in Russia, where Bond is chatting with a couple of soldier types about the key to the aeroplane. It's a bit silly really, with Bond just finding the key on a table after asking where it is, which is the whole point I suppose, highlighting how daft some game plots can be when you actually stop to think about them. There's a section called The Pitch, which is a very brief summary of GoldenEye's plot, British agent, wisecracks, satellite weapon, London town, you know the drill. Then there's a box called Excuse Me, which is pretty funny. It asks if you owned a mega expensive flying vehicle, would you leave the key just lying on a table a few meters away with just a couple of blokes watching it? Exactly, they say. It's a bit of a laugh, reminding you of some of the less sensible moments in even the best games. Down the side there's a film strip showing various N64 games. You can see bits of Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, Star Wars Rogue Squadron, and of course GoldenEye again. Yeah, a light-hearted look at game plots, not taking itself too seriously, which is always good. This page then looks like a bit of a retrospective on GoldenEye 007, doesn't it? Scene 5 shows Bond in the 7-Aya bunker interior, taking out a security camera, and the magazine has a bit of a dig, saying that shooting cameras is just asking for trouble, and someone in the control room is bound to notice the static. 2. Scene 7 is Monte Carlo, frigate interior, where Bond is facing a terrorist with a hostage. Bit dramatic, that. Bond tells him to drop the gun, naturally, and then just shoots him anyway, which the magazine finds a bit over the top, saying Bond isn't exactly rescuing the hostages, just leaving them to panic and seemingly drown. Cheeky. Scene 10 is St. Petersburg, Statue Park exterior, with Bond and Valentin talking. Apparently Giannis is waiting for Bond by the statue of Lenin. Then in Scene 11, St. Petersburg Military Archives, interrogation room, Bond and Valentin is captured. The magazine points out, the guards are a bit daft for leaving a gun and ammo right in front of Bond. Surprise surprise, Bond grabs it and takes them out. Clever, very clever. Pretty. Scene 14, somewhere near St. Petersburg train, interior, shows Bond and Natalia trapped in a sealed carriage with a bomb. Giannis is having a bit of a laugh, saying, "Good luck with the floor, James." The review notes that Giannis seems to give Bond a lot of fighting chances, and it's a bit convenient. Bond has a laser watch for this mission, isn't it? Grey. There's also an excuse me section about Scene 10, where Bond shoots Valentin in the back, but then he's back later in St. Petersburg, strutting around like nothing happened. Something clearly went wrong there, alright. Kute. All in all, looks back at some of the more, shall we say, questionable moments in GoldenEye 007. Still, can't deny it was a classic on the N64, even if it had its silly bits. This page from the magazine is all about The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. Seems like they're calling it Losing the Plot. It's got a breakdown of different scenes from the game. Warrington's. Scene 2 is in the Kokiri Forest shop. Link's trying to buy a Deku shield, and the shopkeeper is being a bit of a Jobsworth, asking where he got the money, especially after Link admits he nicked it from other people's houses. The "excuse me" section underneath is having a laugh about how easily Link can get money just by smashing pots and cutting grass, making the shopkeeper's concern a bit daft. Then there's Scene 5 in Hyrule Field at night, where Link's fighting a Stalfos. The Stalfos is giving Link compliments on his sword skills, but Link admits he only just found the sword. Another "excuse me" bit below talks about all the stuff Link finds on his adventure: swords, shields, catapults, hookshots, boomerangs, bombs, ocarinas, and even horses, and how he masters them all instantly, like he learned to ride a bike without stabilizers, which is a bit of a funny comparison. Scene 10 is at Lake Hylia during the day, and Link's chatting to a Zoran who's been looking for Princess Zora. Link casually says he found a bottle saying she's in Jabu Jabu's stomach, which is a bit of a shocker for the Zoran. The "excuse me" for this scene is pointing out the Zoran's apparent ineptitude for missing a massive bottle in a near-empty lake while they spend their lives underwater. Scene 25 is in the Kakariko village windmill, with adult Link and the windmill guy. The windmill guy is going to teach Link the Song of Storms, claiming he learned it from Link when he was a child, which is a time travel paradox that's messing with his head. The "excuse me" below gets into the time travel weirdness, saying Link only learns the song because the windmill guy teaches it, but the windmill guy can only teach it because he learned it from Link himself. It's a proper head-scratcher. Scene 32 is at the top of Death Mountain, with Big Goron and Link. Big Goron says Link's big sword will be ready in 3 days, but Link's a bit miffed as everyone in Hyrule just repeats the same day over and over, and everything's always available instantly. The "excuse me" bit here mentions how Miyamoto bravely put real time into Zelda. It says the sunsets and sunrises are nice, but Link's stuck in a Groundhog Day loop where everyone does the same thing every day. Finally, Scene 42 is in Ganon's organ room in Ganondorf's castle. Link says "hey," and Ganondorf pretends he didn't see Link as he was busy playing the organ, and then asks if Link realizes he's killed all his henchmen. Link just says, "Listen to this, I can play chopsticks." The "excuse me" below explains that Ganondorf's room setup is so he can spot anyone, but instead of attacking Link he just plays a menacing tune on his giant keyboard. Odd chap indeed. Overall, it's a funny look at some of the more bizarre and slightly illogical bits in Ocarina of Time, which, back in '99, we probably just accepted as part of the game's charm, didn't we? This page here is having a look at a couple of stone-cold classics on the N64, Super Mario 64, and Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as it's known over here, proper names and all that. First up, it's Super Mario 64, with a couple of scenes highlighted. Scene 5, Peach's castle interior, where Mario's getting confused by the perspective trick making him look bigger or smaller, which they point out is just clever camera work and level design. Then scene 15 is the Bowser World 3 fight, and it seems they're having a bit of a laugh at Bowser for being a bit of a one-trick pony in these battles, always getting thrown into bombs and never quite learning his lesson. The, excuse me, boxes have a bit of a dig at Bowser for not being the sharpest tool in the box, which is fair enough. He does keep falling for the same old tricks. Then it's on to Lilac Wars. Scene 5, Sector X, focuses on Slippy being a bit too keen and getting himself in trouble, as usual, whacking into a robot's fist. Falco, bless him, doesn't seem too bothered about rescuing Slippy, which sounds about right for Falco, always a bit of a lone wolf. In Scene 42, Zones Area, it's all going wrong for the Great Fox, with missiles incoming and ROB struggling to find the laser button. Typical ROB. You'd think he'd have that sorted by now. The, excuse me, box for Lilac Wars reckons Slippy's a bit of a liability, and maybe shouldn't be flying with the big boys, which is a thought many of us probably had back in the day watching him bumble around. So yeah, a bit of nostalgia looking back at Mario and Star Fox, reminding you of the simple pleasures of chucking Bowser around and putting up with Slippy's mishaps. Good times. This page of N64 Magazine, right, it's all about Shadow Man. Remember that one? They were proper bigging it up, weren't they? Cross Zelda with Resident Evil. Bit much. Even for them. They're saying it's the world's first review, and it's only in N64 Mag, trying to make you feel special for reading it. Apparently it's some voodoo classic from Iguana, whatever that means. They're saying don't miss it on August the 6th. Then you've got this PAL Reviews Bonanza bit, which means they're cramming in a load of reviews for us, PAL region folks. Looks like they've got Quake 2, which was already out on PC for ages by then, but hey ho, N64 got it eventually. World Driver Championship looked a bit like a less exciting San Francisco Rush if I remember right. F1 World Grand Prix 2, another racing game, there were loads of them about. And WWF Attitude. For all the wrestling fans, smashing chairs over each other and all that. Standard N64 fare really. A mixed bag of stuff to keep us going until Christmas I suppose. This page of Planet 64 Mag, issue 32 it is, eh? Crikey, already up to 32 issues, time flies. Looks like they are promising a whopping 140 pages this month, blimey, that's a lot of trees. Ooh. Right then, even more picks, what have we got? Ah yeah, big hitters there. Perfect Dark, Resident Evil 2, and Donkey Kong 64. Can't go wrong with those. Wonder what they're saying about Perfect Dark. Everyone was raving about that at the time. Rare were on fire back then, weren't they? Resident Evil 2 on the 64, now that's a bit of a surprise. Squeezing that onto a cartridge, fair play. And Donkey Kong 64, bet that's got Collectathon written all over it. Reviewed section, let's see. Command & Conquer 64. Strategy games on consoles were always a bit dodgy controls-wise, weren't they? Pokemon Stadium 2, more pocket monsters battling it out, the kids will go mad for that. Harrier 2001, never really got into that one myself. Looked a bit like a poor man's Ace Combat. Next month in Planet Game Boy. Oh look, they're still plugging the old Game Boy, bless it. R-Type DX, Vigilante 8, Mario Golf, and even Resident Evil 2 again, but this time on the handheld. Mario Golf on the Game Boy, that could be a bit of alright on the commute. And typical magazine blurb, first news on the latest N64 games, tons of new tips and cheats, every Jap and American game reviewed, yeah we've heard it all before. The only reviews you can trust, bit full of themselves aren't they? Still, we all lapped out back then to see if we should be bothering with any of these new games. Freebie alert! Double game guide this month, for Star Wars Rogue Squadron. That was a decent game actually, proper felt like you were in the films, if a bit blocky. On sale, Friday the 6th of August, right then, payday is around then isn't it? Might have to pick this up if there's nothing else on the telly. Independent Nintendo Magazine, that's Planet 64 for yeah. Issue 137, August 1999, there you go. Another month, another pile of N64 games to drool over, and probably not be able to afford. This page from issue 31, right, let's have a look. It's got a feature article called Wish You Were Here, about Mystical Ninja starring Gomon, that quirky game from Konami. Remember Gomon? Madcap Japanese platforming with robots and all sorts. Proper bonkers. Mark Green wrote this one. He seems to be saying it's a bit of a laugh, even admits to spitting tea out at Milo's Astro Lanes, which sounds terrible, but Gomon is good. Says it's one of the better 3D platformers outside of Nintendo's own stuff, reckons it was impressive compared to Mario 64, which is high praise indeed, maybe a bit strong, but it was good. He talks about monster pool tables and robots, sounds like classic Gomon chaos, mentions collecting citizens and a mermaid girl called Yae, seems like a typical action-adventure with some RPG bits thrown in. He's not keen on the hints in the game, says they're annoying, typical game hints back then weren't they? Bit too on the nose. Says the price was a bit steep, £60, cartridges were pricey then. Disturbing songs and weird Japanese titles were all part of the charm though, wasn't it? He ends up saying if you can find a copy, grab it, even if it's for a poster. Cheeky. Gah. Then there's the index on the right, listing all the bits and bobs in this issue. 40 Winks preview, Bugs Life review. Our Marines, never heard of that one, must have been a stinker. Special investigation, back issues, charts, South Park Chef's Love Shack preview. Oh yeah, South Park was everywhere then. Club 64, contacts, contents, directory, Donkey Kong 64 preview, that was a big one on the horizon. Duck Dodgers preview, Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, Excitebike preview, Fanzine Farm, Fighting Force review, Game On, Hacks Entertainment, How to Beat Star Wars Episode 1, Racer, Hotline Tips, I'm the Best, Jet Force Gemini Special Investigation, Kirby 64 preview, Losing the Plot, Mario Golf 64 review, Multiplayer final results, New goods, news, next month, Perfect Dark future look, everyone was hyped for Perfect Dark. Planet Game Boy, Premier Manager 64 review, Quake 2 future look, Rayman 2 previews, Reader reviews, Release list, Retro World, Revolt preview, Shadowgate 64 review, Shadowman Diary, Skill Club 64, South Park Rally preview, subscriptions, Superman review, Taz Express preview, Tips Extra, Top Gear Rally 2 future look, Welcome to N64, and Wish You Were Here, which is the Goemon article, naturally. Blimey, that's a lot in one issue. Seems like they covered everything and anything on the N64 back then. This issue was on sale Monday, July 12th, and next one out Friday, August 6th, so a quick turnaround back then, wasn't it? Good times.